Emily Smith was in front of the mirror, trying on a little lace headscarf. I wondered if I could let my hair hang down my back and let it hang loosely. Would that be okay? Or is it better to put it in a bundle? The girl was a little nervous because for the first time in her life she was going to participate in the baptismal ceremony, but she didn't know how to behave during this sacred act. Sarah invited Emily to become godmother to her son. 2 years ago, this old friend had married Jason, a wealthy young businessman who couldn't resist her beauty, a simple bookkeeper from the neighborhood children's library. He fell head over heels in love with Sarah. The couple quickly got married, and recently a friend gave birth to her husband's son Tommy, a wonderful boy, whose godmother was to be Emily, as godfather was invited an old friend of their family, Benjamin. The man was flattered by Jason and Sarah's proposal, so he gladly agreed. They really hoped that Benjamin, who had a lot of experience in this, would tell the girl what to do. The man was already godfather to 3 children of his close friends. Having finally settled on an elegant closed dress with long sleeves and a high hairstyle, which Emily planned to hide under a neat kerchief, the girl left her reflection with satisfaction. Okay, Emily nodded and took one last meticulous look at herself from head to toe. I'm sure the godmother will manage her duties somehow. Anyway, I don't have a long dress, so I'll have to go in this one. The girl picked up her small purse and hurried outside, where her favorite fiancé Ryan was already waiting for her. Well, my fairy godmother, are you ready? He jokingly asked Emily and kissed her on the tip of her nose. I hope more yes than no, Emily replied with a funny face and smiled softly at Ryan. She was madly in love with her boyfriend. I feel like everyone will see my knees shaking at the ceremony. I'm nervous. Don't worry, Ryan reassured her and put his arm around her waist. Somehow I'm 250% sure you'll make a great godmother. Really? Emily looked at her lover with slight disbelief. Or are you just trying to tease me? You know, Ryan, sometimes I don't know when you're being serious and when you're joking. Emily sighed, and Ryan turned her around to face him and took her lightly by the shoulders. I'm absolutely serious about this. Emily, listen to me. Look me straight in the eye. You'll see. Tommy won't even cry in your arms. Do you believe me? Emily was confused, and then she fluttered her long eyelashes a few times and brightened her smile. Yes, I do. Good, Ryan nodded. Let's hurry up or Sarah's going to start calling you. You said yourself that she likes to be in control. We don't want to get out of her schedule. The young people got into a cab and drove to the temple where the ceremony was to take place. Emily was 26 years old and Ryan was a little older. He turned 28 this year. Guy and girl were very much in love with each other and were planning to get married soon. Emily worked as a nurse in a private clinic and really loved her job. The girl believed that she could not help people. Such a merciful character she had. In addition, she sincerely believed that the ability to medicine passed to her directly from her birth mother. Julia Smith for 30 years worked as a therapist in one of the city clinics, and just like her daughter, sincerely loved her work. Emily's family was ordinary, but very friendly. The parents of the girl always supported each other and never quarreled even over trifles. Emily sometimes even marveled at how they managed to solve all the most difficult situations peacefully. For all their mutual love, they were so different. Emily's father, Henry Smith, had worked as a truck driver for many years, until 1 year ago, on a fateful fall night, he was in a terrible accident, which made the 56-year-old man, recently full of strength and health, wheelchair-bound. Even though the doctors at the time told him and his mother that it was a miracle that their husband and father survived such a car accident, the truck slid along the unstable wet road for a few dozen meters before hitting the iron breaker and collapsing into the ditch. This was little consolation to the father of the family, however, for Smitzer had completely lost sensation in his legs, and, as a consequence, the ability to walk. You just don't give up hope, the doctor warned them then, and Henry, not all is lost yet. There are specialists in our city who can perform the appropriate surgery. Then the chances of your spouse's recovery will greatly increase. But you see, such a complicated operation will cost money. Frankly, I tell you, a lot of money. Julia and Emily herself were terribly upset. The sum named by her father's physician was simply unaffordable for them at that time. Henry himself, however, had no intention of giving up without a fight. It's okay. Now I'll pass the medical examination, I'll get a pension, and then we'll do what all honest people do, save up. God willing, in a year or two we will collect the necessary amount. The women then supported the cheerful mood of their man, but it did not last long. The further they went on, the clearer it became that they were unlikely to be able to save so much money. Deep down, all the members of the Smith family realized that the operation was probably doomed to failure, but nevertheless, none of them dared to say it out loud. They just did their work and hoped that the personal money they had saved would be enough for at least part of the operation, and they wanted to pay for the other half by taking out a loan. When Emily managed to get a job as a nurse at a private medical center, her mood improved. The pay was better than in the city hospitals, and the working conditions were much better. For the first time, the young nurse began to think that they might be able to raise most of the money for her father's surgery on their own, without the help of a bank. It made her heart beat faster with joy. A special place in Emily's soul and life, of course, was Ryan, her fiancé. He worked as a manager in a trading firm selling water heating equipment for private households and business centers, and of course was not poor. The money he received from his job was enough to rent a decent apartment and to travel once a year on vacation to the sea. Emily was proud of her Ryan. Few people she knew had such a modest, kind, intelligent, and charming fiancé. The couple planned to get married next month. The young people had already applied to the registry office and now were preparing for the upcoming celebration. Like any girl in love, Emily experienced an incredible mental uplift, and therefore most of the time was in an exceptionally good mood. This, however, did not cancel the fact that at home she also constantly felt a slight anxiety and nervousness. After all, a huge part of the troubles associated with the organization of the wedding lay on her fragile shoulders. Almost everything, from the choice of dress and the general image of the bride to the seating of several dozen guests at the festive table, was to be organized by her and her mother. Ryan often tried to help. In fact, most of the money for all the expenses was given by him, but he admitted that he had no idea how it all should look like. The groom suggested Emily to order the organization of the celebration from a proven firm, one of the best in the city. "This is our wedding, Ryan, and I want to choose myself what napkins to put on the table and what balloons to decorate the restaurant. Besides, the current organizers of celebrations deliberately overpriced twice. They take advantage of the fact that future newlyweds have little time. That's it, and screwed up on everything in a row. Why, you may ask? If we ourselves can save very well on the same artificial flowers and music." The bride flatly refused. "As you wish." Ryan threw up his hands peacefully, not wanting to argue with his beloved. "Just promise me you'll tell me if you suddenly need any help from me." "I will," Emily promised him, and deciding to play a little joke on the guy, said with a sly squint, "I'll send you a check when the money runs out." Ryan laughed and immediately started tickling his fiancée. "Oh, so I'm just in it for the money," he growled playfully. "Look how self-serving my bride," Emily squealed happily, trying to throw her fiancé's hands off her ribs. Emily loved that Ryan had such a light and simple sense of humor. He naturally never suspected her of anything of the sort and trusted the girl completely in everything that concerned their future joint budget. Nevertheless, the bride was pleasantly warmed by the thought that they understood and felt each other so well that they could talk and joke with each other on absolutely any topics. In short, Emily and Ryan were simply the perfect couple. And although organizing the upcoming wedding took an incredible amount of energy and effort, Emily was convinced that it was all worth it, and they would have the most memorable ceremony, which their grandchildren would not be ashamed to tell about. When, in the middle of calculating the number of guests, Sarah called her and invited her to be the godmother, Emily couldn't refuse. She felt very warmly toward her friend and her newborn son. That's why now on the way to the temple she was excitedly crumpling a small silk handkerchief. Ahead of her was the baptism of little Tommy. The sun's rays burned on the golden domes of the church. It made them shine in a special way that day, softly and dimly, invitingly. Emily felt a sense of solemnity, as if someone upstairs already knew that a new soul was coming into the world today. By the appointed time, the parking lot in front of the temple soon enough began to fill with newly arrived cars, most of which were expensive foreign cars. However, there were also those who had arrived by cab, just like Emily and Ryan O'Regan, even those who had come on foot. Some of the guests went into the interior of the church. The other part stayed waiting at the entrance to later greet Jason and his wife after the baby's baptism. "Wow, look, Ryan, there must be 100 people here," at least Emily exclaimed as she climbed out of the cab. "Yeah," the groom responded, glancing at his watch. "Looks like your friend and her husband have plenty of wealthy friends. Well, I have to stop by the office on the way. The boss asked me to pick up some documents from them. I'll see you at home." Okay, Ryan warned his fiancée in advance that he wouldn't be able to attend the ceremony with her. He had a lot of work to do that day. Emily wasn't upset. After all, she understood that he was working for their mutual good. The guy hugged his beloved goodbye and then disappeared inside the car again. "Remember, you're going to do great. You're a great godmother," he poked his head out the window and gave her one last encouragement. "Go already," Emily said with an embarrassed smile, even though she was already shaking. I'll tell you all about it tonight." Ryan left, and Emily looked around. She and Benjamin, the second godfather on her husband's girlfriend's side, were supposed to meet at the church at the same time. The girl noticed that today there were many beggars and homeless people near the church. People often stay close to such places. After all, here you can always count on at least some change. Someone will give a coin, and some people give banknotes on big holidays, all in joy. Those who are more fortunate in life are always happy to help the disadvantaged and act nobly. Sometimes the homeless can count on a loaf of bread and the opportunity to get somewhere used, but warm clothes. Today, the local homeless apparently heard from one of the church workers that the baptism of a rich man's son was coming. There were 30 people lined up along one of the church walls. Emily shook all the change she had out of her purse and gave it to the poor. Her heart bled every time she thought of how hard it was for those poor people on the street. "How glad I am to have found you," came a voice behind the girl. Benjamin, she greeted the acquaintance, and together they made their way to the temple where the rite of the sacrament of baptism was just beginning. To Emily's great relief, the rite went smoothly. Tommy, of course, screamed when the bishop began to dip him in the font. But as soon as he wrapped the baby in a towel and handed him to Tommy, the boy immediately quieted down. "Wow," she thought to herself, "this is just like Ryan said it would be. So I can really be a good godmother for this baby. Sarah, Jason, congratulations. Your Brandon now has a guardian angel at his back," Emily said happily, handing the baby from hand to hand. "Your baby's dozing off." "It went well. He didn't cry much," Sarah asked excitedly, looking into her son's face. "Tommy did well. He made it all the way to the holy water," Benjamin said with a victorious fist. "And Emily, too. You should have seen the look on her face when Tommy handed it to her. It was like seeing the Virgin Mary. Then he told me it's rare to have such a bright godmother. That's a very good thing for a baby." "There seems to be something special about your Emily." Emily flashed with embarrassment and hurriedly turned the conversation from her person back to Tommy. A short time later, as Emily was coming down the steps of the church, a beggarly old man squeezed through the crowd. "Congratulations," he said to her. At first, Emily thought it was one of those poor beggars asking for alms, but the old man, who looked to be about 70 years old, just stood silently looking at the girl without making any attempt to speak to her or ask her for money. The old man, dressed in simple, worn almost to holes dark gray pants, a shirt of indeterminate color, and a light sports jacket, looked at Emily with inexpressible longing in his gaze for a split second. It even seemed to the nurse that the beggar's face was vaguely familiar to her. However, the girl was quite sure that she did not know this man and had never met him before. "Excuse me, can I help you?" Emily asked, unable to bear the piercing gaze. "Maybe you need money now. I think I have a few dollars left." The new godmother started rummaging through her purse, but out of the corner of her eye, she saw the old man shake his head. "I don't want your money, honey. I didn't come here for that," he said. Emily froze and struggled to look back at the poor man. "Why then?" she asked cautiously. The older man looked around, then moved a little closer to the nurse and said quietly, "Your fiancé, Ryan, you don't know, and neither does he. But anyway, he's very rich. Do you understand?" Emily recoiled. "What is he talking about?" The girl thought that the poor man was probably a little crazy, or worse, a fool. But he didn't think of stopping. "The father of that boy you baptized today, he didn't become rich for nothing. I unwittingly helped his family without realizing it. It was a long time ago, but that's not even the point, sweetheart. I'm your fiance's father." The astonished Emily didn't know what to think. She wanted to ask the old man more, but the crowd of people meeting Sarah and Jason pushed the beggar aside, and he quickly disappeared from view. The girl walked home as if in a fog. She couldn't get the strange beggar out of her head. "No, this can't be true," Emily thought to herself. On the other hand, he didn't look like a madman or a crook. Why would he say something like that to her when she knew perfectly well that Ryan? But on the other hand, he did say his name. How could the poor guy know such personal information? Emily remembered exactly how she'd met her fiancé. She and Ryan had met a year ago at a birthday party for one of Emily's college friends. They bumped into each other by chance as they were both heading toward the picturesque little lake near the friend's country home where the party was being held. When Emily saw Ryan, tall and slender, and looked into his sky-blue eyes, her heart melted, and she felt a strong sympathy for him. Ryan, too, was captivated by Emily as soon as he heard her gentle voice and saw her long, perfectly blonde hair, as if they had conspired. They realized that they had a lot in common. They both liked the same books, and in terms of movies, their tastes were similar. Emily, despite her work as a nurse, just loved to read Renaissance poetry, and Ryan called Hemingway and Fitzgerald his favorite writers. That moonlit night on the lake was the beginning of their tender and incredibly romantic relationship. Ryan was always trying to surprise her, and sometimes he made inhuman efforts to do so. So one day he decided to organize his beloved a real evening of Spanish passion. Somewhere he'd gotten a guitar, a folk costume with a pear and a wide-brimmed hat, and rented a construction cradle from the local housing service for the evening. Emily was just about to go to bed when she heard outside her window first a strange mechanical creak, and then the lingering notes of some suspiciously Spanish-like serenade. Carefully approaching the window, the girl slowly pulled back the curtain and almost laughed. Standing in front of her in a construction cradle was Ryan, dressed in the national costume of a Spanish street singer. He was desperately trying to imitate the Latin American pronunciation of the words of the song. "Oh my God, keep it down," Emily whispered. Looking back, her parents would hear. "What are you doing here at this hour? Have you lost your mind?" "Yes, I have gone mad with passion for you, my dear Beatrice," stretching the vowels and gently touching the strings of the guitar, sang her lover. The girl laughed softly and helped the boy to climb over the windowsill to her room. "Your jokes are going to backfire on you someday." Emily wagged her finger at him and then gave the serenade singer a touching kiss. "The fourth floor didn't scare me. I was led to you by the power of exceptional love." Ryan squinted slyly at her and then explained in his usual voice. "Actually, I only rented this thing for 2 hours. I thought if you and your mother went to visit your relatives, I'd drive her away quietly. No one will see my shame." They hugged and spent a few more minutes in each other's arms before Emily helped Ryan out and carefully made her way downstairs. There were several more instances like this in their relationship, and each time was a complete surprise to Emily. She adored Ryan as much as he adored her. The only thing that kept her wondering at first was why the guy wouldn't introduce her to his parents. "Yes, they are busy, always all in their commerce," joked the guy, hinting that his mother and father were actively engaged in the sale of some medical equipment. "Maybe we could all have dinner together next time they flew back from their business trip from Kansas." Emily agreed, of course. But still, in the back of her mind, she had a strange feeling that there was something wrong with the story of her Ryan's parents. Finally, after the guy refused to introduce her to his family, Emily couldn't stand it and asked her lover directly. "Stop bullshitting me," Ryan explained to me, "where your mother and father are. You've been promising me to meet them for 6 months, and every time you do, you make up some ridiculous excuse instead. What's going on? We promised we'd never lie to each other." Ryan lowered his head, then said in a muffled voice, "I'm sorry, Emily, I just didn't want you to think I was something I wasn't, that I wasn't worthy of you." "What are you talking about?" The girl didn't understand. "Why can't you be worthy of me? What kind of nonsense is that?" The guy sighed heavily before answering and looked somewhere in the distance past his girlfriend. "You see, you have such great parents. Mom is a therapist, Dad is a real fighter, fights for his health. It is necessary. What kind of fortitude to have." "So what? Your parents are doing good things too. You said so yourself." "I don't have parents," Ryan cut her off abruptly. "I never had any. I lied to you. I thought you wouldn't go out with me if you knew I was an orphanage graduate." Emily froze for a second, unable to move from the realization of the truth. "So you're an orphan?" she asked slowly. "Yes," Ryan nodded. "As long as I can remember, I've always lived in an orphanage. I'm sorry, I was really afraid you'd fall out of love with me if you knew the truth." Emily silently hugged her lover and rested his head against her chest. "How weird are you, Riley? How could I stop loving you over something like that? What kind of situations do people have in life?" Emily felt Ryan squeeze her tighter in his arms. "You know what, Mom? I never told you this, but I thank God every day that I met you. If it wasn't for you showing up in my life, it would have remained so empty forever." Probably lacking any higher meaning, Emily pulled away from the boy and looked into his clear eyes. "And now it turns out there is meaning." Ryan smiled genuinely, a little childishly. "It turns out there's you, and at home, you're my ultimate meaning now." Immersed in her memories, Emily walked a few more meters when suddenly she felt the ground literally float away from under her feet. It was the sudden dizziness that had caught her in the middle of the busy street. She gasped quietly, at the same time trying to grab the corner of the house she was passing near. However, she stumbled, and not feeling her own body, slowly settled on the asphalt. "Girl, are you sick?" someone called out to Emily. For a fraction of a moment, she still tried to resist the dizziness, but the sticky maelstrom of deep fainting swiftly drew the young nurse into its unconscious net. Immediately around her, there were several more excited female screams, but she could hear them no longer. With great speed, the young woman was plunged into endless blackness, and her last thought was only one thing. "That's it. I'm sorry, Riley." When Emily regained consciousness some time later and slowly opened her eyes, she thought for the first moment that she had gone blind. So bright was the room in which she had been placed that the daylight bulbs built into the panel shone brightly from the ceiling, making the surroundings seem unnaturally white, giving her a negative effect after the clammy and cold darkness. To the right of the girl stood several massive devices, one of which constantly emitted a subtle and unpleasant beeping sound. Barely turning her head, Emily realized that this was the way her heart rate was being measured. "Here comes our mysterious patient awake," said an elderly doctor, entering the room after a while. In his hands, Emily noticed a small red folder, which contained some sheets with appointments, prescriptions of drugs, as well as the results of the girl's tests, which the doctor studied with undisguised interest. "Doctor, what's wrong with me?" "How did I get here?" Emily asked, slowly. "Really? You're not kidding?" "I'm going to be a father." Instead of answering, the girl nodded happily and pulled the hospital blanket up to her chin. The doctor said, "It's a sure thing," she added and smiled. "How happy is that?" "I can't believe it," Ryan kept telling himself. "I'm going to be a father. I'm going to be a daddy." "Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you. Thank you." Ryan began to cover the girl's face with kisses and even did a couple of dance laps around the room. It was the first time Emily had ever seen her fiancé so happy. Emily Riley asked timidly, suddenly remembering something, "Can I ask you one thing?" "Of course, anything," the boy assured her. "You shifted a little, but you still dared to say it. Once you told me about the orphanage. You said you'd lived there for as long as you could remember. And you don't remember what happened before that. No memories of the people who might have put you there." The smile slowly faded on Ryan's face. The young man frowned and sat down on the edge of his fiancé's bed. "No, I told you, I don't remember anything at all. Maybe there was something. But I was so small at the time, I don't think I could have remembered anything." "Why do you ask?" "No reason," the bride said evasively and averted her eyes. "I was just thinking about something." "Never mind. It's nothing." The girl bit her lip. She wondered if the strange old man's confession could be true, even partially. In the end, Emily decided to find the beggar and find out everything from him, so that there would be no mistake. A couple of days later, Emily was discharged from the hospital, and without wasting time, she, instead of work, went in search of the mysterious poor man. The first thing she did, of course, was to go to the very church where her friend's son was baptized and where she saw the man she needed so much. As usual, there were many beggars around, but she did not find the old man among them. Having gathered courage, Emily approached a group of elderly homeless people and asked them if they had seen her acquaintance. The beggars looked at the young girl with suspicion at first. Why should she, such a beautiful woman, look for some poor man? But then one of them did talk, receiving from Emily as an incentive of $5. "Actually, this Nikita will not be one of ours," began the homeless man. He didn't seem to be begging at all, just poorly dressed, and he didn't seem to be doing very well with money either. "So his name was Nikita," the girl noted to herself. "All right. Anything else you can think of?" Another homeless man in his 60s on crutches said slowly, obviously recalling some details. He seemed to be a visitor from the region. He said, "I want to confess in the temple. I sinned a lot in my youth. I've plowed all the blackness out of my soul," he said. And I also noticed that he was expressing himself in an uncomplicated way. And then he saw someone in the crowd and shook all over, as if he had been struck in the head by lightning, by God. And that was it. He was gone. We never saw him again. Emily looked around. "Where do you think he might have gone? He must have spent the night somewhere." The homeless people said, "We don't know." Emily was upset. So she'd have to leave with nothing, with just a name that doesn't really mean anything. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. But then she was approached by a woman whose age was hard to determine by eye. She could have been in her 30s, or even in her 50s. The woman smiled quite friendly. The girl realized that the woman needed a reward, so without further ado she offered her a dolce, $1. "The man you're looking for is staying at a cheap hostel in the corner of Lincoln Avenue," she shouted in a hoarse voice. "I saw him drive in there myself. He had a gym bag on his shoulder, but it was small. So he won't be here long. You'd better hurry if you want to catch him." "Thank you," Emily thanked the woman profusely, and she took a quick step in that direction. The homeless woman wasn't lying. As Emily approached the hostel, she saw the old man who had introduced himself as Ryan's father. The man was sitting on a bench in front of an unremarkable, dilapidated building, smoking a cigarette thoughtfully. "Where are you?" "Did I find you after all?" Emily exhaled excitedly and literally fell on the bench next to the old man. "Yes, I wasn't in any particular hurry, he said, letting out a cloud of smoke. I'll be gone today, sweetheart. Don't worry. I won't bother you and Ryan anymore. I understand that you're his fiancée, right? Emily corrected the old man. We were supposed to get married next month, but how do you know my fiancés? Why did you say you were his father? Please tell me. I really need to know. Ryan said he was an orphan and that he never knew his parents. Mind you, I'm not leaving here until I know the truth. Emily lifted her chin bravely and prepared to hear any answer but a negative one. To her surprise, the elderly poor man spoke up. Let's go to my room. Emily, will you give me a hand? The old man squinted his eyes. What do you think I came to this town for? A short time later, Emily and Ben Adamson, that was the beggar's name, were sitting in the cramped kitchen of the hotel room, drinking strong tea that the old man had made from tea bags. Emily listened intently to his story. It turns out Ben Adamson wasn't always like this. There was a time 30 years ago when he ran a successful business related to the fishing industry. His fish and caviar were present on the shelves of self-respecting, discerning supermarket customers. The businessman's products were very popular and even had an extensive advertising campaign on television. Ben Adamson had everything that could dream of a healthy, strong, purposeful man at his age. A huge luxury mansion on 3 floors with a swimming pool and billiard room. Reliable, stable business, prosperous, expensive car of elite brands, and beloved wife, a beauty who constantly made Adamson feel in her presence young. Everything was good with us, Ben Adamson said, quickly hanging sugar in mugs of tea. The house a full cup. Vacation twice a year. At a time when others couldn't afford to go to the sea once every 5 years, they had clothes and jewelry that the president's wife couldn't even own, and I did everything for Amber, I promise you. The man was silent for a moment, immersed in his memories, and then continued. And the only thing I always asked her to do was to give me a son, an heir. But at first she had no time, and then, in general, we found out that my Amber had almost no chance to get pregnant. Congenital abnormality, so the doctors said. And I was very worried then. I was ready to spend any money for my wife's treatment. If only everything would work out. If only a miracle would happen. And your wife, Emily asked cautiously. She must be terribly upset too. Then the former businessman grinned with the edge of his lips and shook his head negatively. Alas, no. Amber didn't really care if she ever had children or not. Of course, she'd gone for tests, been to an expensive clinic, even gone to a special sanatorium in the Alps, but I could see that she was doing all of this through sheer force. Through she couldn't. Just so that I continued to pay for her endless trips to the beautician, jewelry and fashion boutiques and the like. Ben Adamson said that Amber, having learned the taste of big money, became addicted to spending it on her entertainment. Very quickly. There wasn't a day that Ben didn't receive notice of the fabulous spending his wife was doing. And of course, she didn't care how hard her husband had to work to make more and more money. Sometimes I was physically exhausted just to make a deal. And what do you think at home? The next night, I get a bill from the bank. My Amber, it turns out, had bought herself a fox coat, 6th or 7th in a row. I'd already lost count. The old man confided in Emily. Tommy could not believe that what the beggar was telling her could be the truth. The girl was tormented by the question, how could he have fallen into such deplorable circumstances in life? Sometimes I don't understand how she could turn so quickly from a simple, somewhat naive, but kind and loving girl into what she became at the end of our marriage, Adamson lamented. I brought her from the backwoods. I thought if her heart was pure, she wouldn't have that thirst. How wrong was I? The former businessman said that it took several more years before he finally realized that he would never have children with his wife. Meanwhile, time was passing. He had already turned 45. And the businessman was well aware that in 10 to 15 years he would still need a successor, someone to whom he could hand over the management of the company. And then I thought, what do I have to lose? Who cares how I have a son? As long as I finally have one single person by my side who I hoped would love me as a father, as a dad, and not as a walking bag of money desperate. Ben wanted to take the boy from the orphanage and even began to collect all the necessary documents. When, as if out of the blue, he got the news that his wife was pregnant. You can't imagine what I experienced then. The former businessman shared his heartbreak with his girlfriend. This is an incredible feeling for a man, the opportunity to become a father, and even a native son. Can you imagine? True, Amber my whole term suffered from toxicosis and other female troubles, but at the end of the day, at least I was happy. His wife, when it came to childbirth, scolded terribly. She was ready to burn him with a look. Only I told her clearly then, be patient. It's a woman's duty to me. Give birth to my son. And she did. Adamson plunged into memories that Emily realized were the happiest of his life. She was a different person then. I thought I finally had the girl I'd once fallen madly in love with back. For 3 years, she took care of the baby. She did everything around the house by herself. Basically, she became a normal woman. I couldn't get overjoyed. I thought, well, that's it. It's true what they say, that a child directs his mother only for the better. But even here I miscalculated. The old man sighed deeply, and tears glistened in his eyes. As it turned out, Ben spent all his free time working and expanding the company. Wanted to make sure Ryan and Amber had only the best of everything, and make sure they didn't need anything for the rest of their lives. However, the longer he was away from home, the cooler their spouse and relationship became. Amber didn't care about the deals and her family's well-being. Gradually, the dragon that had fallen asleep for a while inside the woman who had just given birth raised its muzzle again. I mean, she's got me wrapped around her finger, hasn't she? Can you imagine? Adamson lamented. Ryan was only 3 years old when she started dumping him on the nanny when I wasn't there, and she was tumbling around in our bedroom with her young lover, my driver. By the way, I, as the last fool, was among the last to know. All the servants kept silent, afraid of the anger of this scoundrel, and it was to her advantage when the fact of treason was revealed. This was followed by a huge scandal, during which, as the businessman said, his wife told him that he broke her whole life and drank all the juices out of her, and then she ran away. Just like that, she left him with a small son in her arms. He only later realized that she had been preparing for divorce in this way for a long time, and now decided to go straight to the front. She faxed him all the documents. Can you imagine that? Of course. After all, she was now entitled to half his company and his money, and she got it all. Every last dime. While he was slowly but surely going down the drain, she spent and spent and spent. The older man looked tired. The girl realized that he was reliving those dramatic moments of his youth that he had decided to tell her about. After that, it was as if something had broken in him. He does not know, probably this expression will seem trite, but it was. He felt with his skin how all his hopes and dreams broke with a loud crunch, like bones in the hot sun. He started drinking a little at first, and only with trusted friends. But then, he didn't notice it himself. At some point, all these marginalized individuals started showing up at his house. The thing is, at that point, he didn't think they were marginalized at all. Quite the opposite. He had no one he could go to for advice. You wouldn't go to the cook or the gardener with that, would you? Would you? So maybe he began to seek solace at the bottom of a bottle. In the space of 6 months, Adamson had gone from successful businessman to neglected alcoholic. The man felt how his dark side is increasingly taking over, and realized that he himself can no longer cope with this problem. However, instead of turning to the appropriate specialists, Ben handed over the management of all the affairs of his firm to a good companion, hoping that he would be able to keep his company afloat. While Adamson himself would indulge in various vices, I turned the company over to this Johnson, the companion. We trusted him with the firm, and we left our son in charge. A Riley of his own, God forgive him, almost sobbed the ex-businessman. But what else was I to do? I had no relatives. And the boy needed someone who wouldn't drink 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without a break. Johnson seemed like a great option to me at the time. I needed to drown out all my pain, Emily. And my son, he was just a baby then, and I was starting to fear for him. As long as something bad didn't happen while I was on another bender, Emily was silent. She didn't know what to say to such a frank confession. After all, she wasn't in Ben's shoes, but she absolutely knew she wouldn't trade her own child for a bottle, even if Ryan suddenly dumped her. While I was drinking, some prominent coworker planted fake documents on me. I signed them in a huff. I don't even remember how, but I ended up in jail. I did almost 8 years on and off, but in that time, Johnson took over my firm, and the bastard gave my son to Riley at the orphanage, realizing that Ben was literally tearing his hair out. Emily tried to calm him down. It turned out that after his release, the former businessman had been wandering the streets for some time, thinking he would never be able to find his son again. I thought Ryan had disowned me. He changed his name, of course, but by then he had nothing left. But when the right people told me who stole my firm and my son from me, I couldn't just swallow it all. Sparks of hatred lit up in Adamson's eyes. How could he do that to me? I thought he was one of my first friends, and he let me go to the world. And he locked my son up in an orphanage. So I pulled myself together and went to my family. I still have some acquaintances from my past life, not the most important ones. So they gave me Ryan's picture and the address where he lives now. Except I never got around to going up to him. I followed you to the church, and then you came up to me and told me everything. But I couldn't understand at first, so I looked for you myself. And I found you. Emily frowned. Then a moment later asked Ben Adamson, "Wait a minute, you said your companion's last name was Johnson?" "Well, yes," Adamson confirmed her guess. "The boy you became godmother to the other day is Gerard's grandson. That is, Jason Johnson, his son." "Gerard's son?" Emily marveled. The man nodded. "Jason, I think, had something to do with it here. I mean, he was just a kid at the time, the same age as my Riley, maybe a little younger. I'd really like to look Gerard in the eye, to ask him for all the years I lost in the colony." Emily thought for a moment, then said, "I think that can be arranged. I'll talk to Sarah and Jason, but I have to warn you, Gerard is very sick right now. The Johnsons themselves don't know if he'll live to see Tommy's next birthday." Then all the more reason to make it. Adamson became agitated upon hearing such information. "And understand, it's important to you and Ryan, isn't it? Maybe this is the only way I can atone for my sins." "I agree," Emily nodded, and they decided to get down to business immediately. Emily wanted to be absolutely sure she wasn't making a mistake. She took Ryan's comb hair, and the hair provided to her by Ben Adamson, and submitted it all to the DNA lab for testing. Exactly a week later, the answer came back confirming the blood relationship between her fiancé and the penniless former businessman Adamson. "So, do you believe it now?" the old man asked her. "I certainly believe it now," the girl answered him. Adamson asked not to organize a meeting with Ryan yet, saying he wanted to settle things with Johnson first. Emily agreed, and soon Ben Adamson was standing in the doorway of his companion's bedroom. An anxious Jason and Sarah said they'd be in the next room, just in case. Adamson was dressed very poorly, and they were still a little wary of him. The nurse assured them nothing to worry about, but she herself stayed in the room with the couple, not wanting to disturb the conversation between longtime friends. "Well, hello, Gerard. I see that fate has rolled over you too. None of us were spared," greeted the sick businessman Ben Adamson. Gerard Johnson was warned who exactly will come to him, and he, to the genuine surprise of his relatives, had himself requested that the watchman be admitted at the earliest opportunity. "Hello, Ben," simply answered his old friend, and tried to get up in bed. Immediately, however, a fit of violent coughing began. The man looked haggard, so undermined was he by years of incurable disease. "Yes, as you can see, I'm about to become a living mummy. I don't have long to live." A faint and sad smile flashed across Johnson's face. "We should get our affairs in order, you and I." Adamson stepped closer to the bed. "You orphaned my son for life. You stole from me. Do you want to answer to me for what you've done, Gerard?" Johnson's dry skin looked like ancient parchment up close. The dying businessman nodded in agreement. "I will answer. Forgive me, Ben, I repent. My soul has sinned. I did a terrible thing to you and your son back then. I think maybe life has punished me with this very disease. I still think, how could I dare to do such a thing? Okay, the firm, you were so drunk that we on the board of directors didn't know if you were going to get out of it or not. But Riley, I'll never forgive myself for that, not even in the afterlife. I'm sorry you pushed me into this, so that my soul won't suffer in eternal fire." Adamson thought for a moment. Before him lay a dying man whose hours were almost numbered. Would he take on another sin? The sin of unforgiveness. "God be with you, Gerard. I forgive you. What are we going to do now? Fight with you till the grave? We're not both young men anymore. I won't take any more sin on my soul." "Thank you," Johnson exhaled with relief. "Barely audible," Adam said, and then convulsed again. "Here's this for you," the businessman said a moment later, and pulled a folder from under the mattress, which he passed from hand to Adamson. The man quickly flipped through the papers and raised an astonished look to his companion. "What is this?" "A wedding present for your son, Ryan," the man said with difficulty, and reached for a glass of water that stood nearby on the nightstand. "It's the paperwork to transfer half of my fortune and assets to your Ryan. Jason is aware of it. He's putting signatures where necessary. May everything I took from you be returned to you, at least for now, while I still have some time left." Shaken to the core, Ben Adamson shook Adam's hand and felt, to his great regret, the incoming death chill of inevitability from his companion. "Thank you," was all Adamson could manage to mumble, followed by a stingy male tear rolling down his cheek. "Ryan and I will never forget you and what you did. It was honorable of you." Adam covered his hand with his palm. "Rest assured, you and your family will have the best of everything. And thank Emily. Tell her thanks for christening my grandson. She's a good girl. She's only going to be happy with Ryan." As he left Adam's room, Ben Adamson kept trying to wipe away the tears dripping from his eyes. But their flow would not stop, revealing the bitterness and pain of the years he had lost and lived so miserably. The next day, Emily organized a meeting between father and son. Ryan was very worried. He couldn't believe that he still had people close to him, especially that he had his own father. Of course, he was shocked by Adamson's story. but he still forgave his father. He had been around, orphaned for too long to throw away the opportunity to have a family again. Son, I'm sorry I was such a fool. If it weren't for the green serpent, you and I would be living very different lives right now. I've wasted so many years, lost you along with them. I don't know if you could take me like that. But if you do, it will be the greatest happiness to me. An old lost man stopped reminiscing about the past. His father hugged him tightly. A bear-like grip. Ryan, it's enough that you and I have spent so many years hobbling around like lost souls. Now that we have the opportunity for a fresh start, are we really going to let this opportunity slip away? After all, in life you should always only move forward, because you can't change the past, and all real life is here and now. Adamson cried, wiping his tears with the sleeve of his son's shirt. Emily quietly walked over to them both and gently stroked the back of first her son, and then his father. Let's go have a better dinner, the pregnant girl suggested to them. By the way, Ben Adamson, as an expert on seafood delicacies, can you tell us which fish is best for the wedding table? Adamson's eyes immediately lit up with the familiar businesslike glint he once adored. I'll not only give you a hint, I'll choose and order the kind of fish that not every millionaire has on his table on holidays. I know, and Ben Adamson went into lengthy explanations of the differences between whitefish and freshly caught Norwegian salmon. So, Nurse Emily opened her eyes. Smiling, she stretched, lay in bed a little longer, and finally stood up. She glanced at her bed, the silk sheets, the blankets inlaid with semi-precious stones, the headboard, the black walnut frame. Emmy's eyes sparkled with happiness, and she laughed loudly. At last my dream has come true, she rejoiced. And no one will take away my happiness. The girl threw on a robe and walked around her room. She enjoyed ironing the expensive furniture and going through all her clothes in her closet. Emily walked over to a small dressing table with a vintage expensive mirror. Emmy, you're doing great, she praised herself. Let everyone else burst with envy now. Exactly a week ago, Emily and John Smith had a wedding that was, even by the standards of rich people, very luxurious. The Smiths have been breeding expensive thoroughbred horses for generations. At their famous stables bred not only Arabian racehorses, but also inimitable American thoroughbred horses, French Percherons, and serious scientific and breeding work was constantly carried out to breed new breeds. This business was very profitable. It is very difficult for an uninitiated person to imagine how many millions of dollars were ready to lay out collectors and just amateurs for the purchase of a rare animal. Smith's stables had long been promoted, so they were known not only to local billionaires, but also to Arab sheiks and members of the English royal family, and even presidents of some African countries. The owner was already 76, but old age was to his face, and he did not give up his position. For the last 5 years, cosmetic surgeons have worked tirelessly on his appearance. That's why he couldn't be more than 55. John Smith was a willful man, and no wonder. Never in his life, since his birth, he knew neither need, nor lack of money, nor hard physical work. But after 60, as they say, he got a whim. He began to dream of eternal youth, and did not let anyone but young girls into his life until the age of 30. For such a big money as he had, you could buy everything. That's why there were so many people willing to try their luck. Emily once again checked that everything in her room was in its place. This had become her tradition, as she again convinced herself that all this was not a dream, and that the girl had married one of the richest men in the country. After applying light makeup and unraveling her long hair, Emmy finally went downstairs. The girl knew that her husband had already left for the stable, which was 20 kilometers away from them. John Smith had many properties both in America and abroad, but he preferred his home, which was near Boston, from where he conducted his business. It was also where the hangar of his personal airplane was located. Good morning, Emily Jones. The housekeeper greeted the girl. Shall I set the table for you? Or will you have breakfast later? No, not at all, replied the young lady. Let's not do it now, I'm busy. I'll tell you later. She went into the kitchen to check how things were going. Everyone was busy doing things. The girl looked at the workers, the kitchen, and the servants with a displeased look and muttered something to herself. She left the kitchen. Well, we must see what they are doing here, she said to herself, and went to check how the house was being cleaned. Why, don't forget to dust that tall closet, Emily said in a businesslike manner, and clean the couch. There seems to be a stain on it. The cleaners nodded silently and continued their daily work. The girl left the house and went to the janitor. The elderly man looked at her unhappily. "Those old pine trees over there," Emily said. "A few branches are broken. You take them down, or the lawn will be full of them later. And tell the gardener to cut back the roses at the end of the garden," she said in a commanding tone. "I was walking there yesterday. Almost all the bushes are in bloom." George Wilson nodded his head in agreement. The man gave his new mistress an angry look. "How many of you have been here before?" he sighed. "So this is the Queen of the Sea today, and tomorrow you'll be back to your holy trough again." The janitor took out his rake and went to the big pine tree in the center of the garden. He carefully picked up some needles and put them in the trash can. "Geez, how many chores do I have to do today?" Emmy said to herself worriedly. "How am I supposed to keep up with everything? There's so much work to do. Everybody thinks it's easy to be rich, but nobody knows how hard it is. For example, today I have a beauty salon at 3 o'clock, and then I need at least a couple hours for shopping. Then I plan to stop by work. You can't ignore that. Everyone needs to see what an amazing young wife John has. And for that I have to go to the hairdresser. I'm not going in there with my hairdress. I need to get my hair done. God, how am I going to have time for all this?" Emily sighed sadly. Now that she was almost the first lady of the oligarch world, she had to take care of herself so that no one would ever notice any flaw in her. And for that, Emmy had to know what to wear, what to eat, and how to talk to rich people. John even hired a few people to teach her etiquette, a designer and a cultural critic, so that she could talk to guests on any topic. The girl herself did not realize that 2 days after the wedding she was so much in her role that it seemed to her as if there had never been a village or an old dilapidated farm in her life. Found something to reminisce about, the girl shuddered. "To hell with it. It's a good thing I'm rid of it all." Emily got into her expensive car and drove to the finest salon in Boston. She had an appointment there at 10. "Emily Jones, it's so good to see you," sang out the salon receptionist. "How are you?" "Svetlana Igorevna," she looked at the woman with a smile. "You can congratulate me. A week ago, John and I signed our marriage." "How happy for you." The receptionist almost threw herself on her neck. "You see? And you were so anxious, weren't you? John told you that you would marry him. Did he keep his word?" "Yes. I've been so nervous. I thought I'd go mad," sighed the girl. "I didn't doubt John's intentions, of course, but he was dragging it out so much. That's why I was scared." "Well, we gave you such powerful treatments last time that you came out just a real queen," the woman praised herself. "So our efforts were not wasted. We don't throw words into the wind. If we say we will, then you will be a queen on the way out." They chatted some more, and the girl walked into a familiar office. It was the most expensive beauty parlor, so to speak, in Boston. Only VIP clients got in here exclusively. For such money, which they asked for the work, you could make a young princess out of an 80-year-old old woman. After 3 hours, Emily Jones looked at herself in the mirror. She liked absolutely everything, but especially the way her eyes had been worked on. Her eyes had become so expressive that no man could resist them. The girl was tired of all these procedures, and after having a cup of coffee with a cake in an elite cafe, she went to an expensive boutique. There she was immediately dressed and redressed. "My God, Emily Jones, you are a goddess. Look at you girls," jumped up and down in front of her. She was enjoying herself very much. She fidgeted in front of the mirror for a few minutes, getting used to the high heels. In about 20 minutes, Emily had paid for everything and was on her way to the hairdresser's. "God, I'm so tired," she complained. "What a busy day today. But I definitely need to visit my stable today." After Emily was fully staffed, she caused quite a furor among everyone. The girl deliberately walked to the big store to enjoy the reactions of passers-by. Men all looked at her without exception. "That's a good thing." Emmy rejoiced. "That's how I want to be greeted at the stables." She went back, got into her car, and took out her cell phone. "Kitty, I have a surprise for you." "I'll come to you soon," she said. "It's about the muzzle," her husband said. "Emmy, are you going to the stables?" "Oh, all right. I'll be looking forward to seeing you." But I have to look into your affairs too, said the girl. If not me, who will be your support in your life? We're a family now, so I know my responsibilities. With that, she hung up the phone. Emmy was 22, and she didn't know much about life yet. But the girl was so afraid of losing her goldfish that she couldn't see from the outside how she was overplaying her hand. She felt like she needed to be serious and fit in with her new status. Emily pulled up to the stables and the automatic gate opened in front of her. She drew in a chestful of air and prepared to catch stares of amazement. But as soon as she put her feet on the pavement, she realized she'd made a mistake with her high heels. The platform quickly ended. The girl saw that almost the entire area was paved with stones. She had to forcefully pull her heels out of the cavities. After a few meters, she almost fell. The workers were bustling around her, but they paid no attention to her. "John, I'm here." "Where are you?" she said, trying to hide her displeasure. "Could you meet me?" Emily stood under the awning, cursing rudely at the workers. "Take Eddie to the stall." "You don't have to chase him," she finally heard her husband's voice. An elderly man in high boots came around the bend. "What's the matter, dear?" He hugged his young wife. "You shouldn't have come here." "It's never clean here. A horse is a restless animal. No matter how much you clean up after it, there is dirt everywhere. Will you be staying long?" "We'll have the horses out in the fields in half an hour, so I'll have to leave you." "Doggy, I love you so much," she kissed John Smith. "I hope you missed me too." Well, of course, John enjoyed the confessions of the young spouse. "Tonight, I'll prove it to you." With a playful wink, he kissed Emily again and went into the office. "Old fool," the girl scolded to herself. "I spent so much time getting ready and he didn't even compliment me. Not a word, not a word. Not that I'm beautiful, not that I look amazing." At that point, she hadn't yet realized that her husband had been in so many romantic relationships that he was no longer interested in foreplay. He was paying, and paying well, to be loved. But expecting care and attention was never included in that cost. You could say he was paying for one-sided love. Even though he had been married 10 times already, John had always considered himself a free man and changed wives easily. Emmy, on the other hand, thought the important thing was that he married her, and she could handle everything else. The girl naively believed that she could control her husband, but her tactics had been wrong from the start. "All right," Emmy said, starting the car. "I'll adjust from the other side." John Smith had 3 sons from different marriages, adults living their own lives. Only one, Michael, remained in Russia. "I should invite Mike to dinner and show him what a hostess I am," the thought flashed through my mind. The old man loves his children, so this should appeal to him. "How would you like it if I threw us a dinner party?" Emily approached her husband that evening. "We could invite Michael." "It's a dead end," she sighed. "Michael's not coming, I know him. After I divorced his mother, he never came to this house." "Well, let's book a table at the restaurant and all right, sit down." The girl did not persist. "He is your son. We need to build a relationship." There was a loud laugh from John Smith. His wife looked at him in amazement. "He still can't forgive me for abandoning his mother. Do you want him to sit with you?" He said through laughter. "He hates all my wives, former and future." "But I hope that I will be the last in this list," said the wife ironically. "Who knows?" John Smith replied cryptically. "Life is such a thing. Today you seem to like someone, and the next day you wake up and can't understand what that woman is doing in your bed." Emily was shocked by what she heard. From that day forward, she decided not to take any chances and keep things under control. She didn't realize that her husband had already been through so much hand-holding that he was able to understand all female psychology with his eyes closed. "Well, we'll see about future wives," she said to herself. "Be sure I'll be the last." "What is your favorite thing about women?" she asked aloud. "When they obey me," laughed John Smith. "I'm so tired of these willful women that I just want a quiet life." The next day, Emily woke up with a heavy head. She couldn't get her husband's words of obey out of her mind. To him, what's that like? She thought. Closing your mouth when he said, "Shut your mouth." Or does it mean being humble? Now, he's given me a conundrum. The girl got out of bed, opened her closet. Her spirits lifted and she went downstairs to chase the servants around a bit. "What is it again?" said the young mistress, pointing to the table. "Is this the second day you haven't changed the roses? I remember. Yesterday they were exactly the same. But they haven't wilted yet," surprised the housekeeper, "and they smell good. Do you want to wait until they look like a graveyard?" Emily looked at her angrily. "Put fresh ones in now." "All right," the woman said shortly and headed out of the dining room. "Fresh flowers will be here right away." The mistress checked on the other workers in the house and, after giving them all a haughty look, went back upstairs to her room. She was about to go into her room when suddenly her phone rang and an unfamiliar number popped up. Emmy heard a familiar voice. "Daughter, how are you doing? Are you completely burnt out?" Emmy said angrily. "I told you never to call me again. Just so you know, I'll block all your numbers. So don't get on my nerves or your own." "But you can't do that." Through tears, said the mother, "I'm worried about you." "Well, then just imagine that I'm dead," the girl shouted in anger and passed out. Emily threw herself on the bed. Her mother reminded her of her past, and the girl never wanted to remember it again. She was living a completely different life now, and would give anything not to go back. "The idiot has taken to ruining my whole mood," she said indignantly. "She probably thinks that if I've arranged a better future for myself, she'll get something too. Let them roam around in their own backwoods with their cows. I hate her so much. She couldn't even buy me an apartment in the city. She never had any money. Let her know where she belongs." Life was hard for Deborah Jones, Emily's mother. Father and mother were the most famous family of alcoholics. Both drank without a drink. The girl was hungry all her childhood, eating what someone brought, and from the clothes she got only neighbors' clothes. No one from the village reported her parents, and the child stayed at home. When Emily was 12 years old, her father, being drunk, drowned in the local river. Her mother started drinking after that. At first, some drunken man appeared in their house, but after a year, Emily's mother threw him out. She didn't love her daughter and couldn't love her because no one had ever seen her sober. It was 3 months before Emily was to be 17 years old when her mother died of cirrhosis of the liver. This did not embarrass the girl in the slightest. She had been living her life for a long time. When she was only 15, she started working as a milkmaid. The collective farm in which the whole village worked had a small farm. There were about 5 people working there. Deborah Jones worked there all her life. When she was 20, a neighbor boy, Ben, asked her to marry. They had a modest wedding and started living together. But 3 years after the birth of their daughter, her husband left her and went to the city in search of a better life. So the woman had to pull everything on her own. She never married again. From childhood, Emmy showed great ambition. At first, her mother thought it was just a game for the girl. Her dolls turned into heroines of her stories, where the protagonist waited for the prince, and he appeared. "When I grow up," 10-year-old Emmy said, "I'm going to live in a big house and wear expensive dresses." Right, her mother stroked her daughter's head. "That's not likely to happen. You won't earn much here in the village, and I don't have money for the city." "But if you don't believe me," said the girl angrily, "then I'll live in my house without you." At first, Deborah Jones took no offense at her daughter, but the older she grew, the more prickly her words became. Sometimes the mother took offense deliberately. "If you loved me even a little, you wouldn't live like this," Emily once told her. "Why wouldn't I?" the mother wondered. "Do I steal or drink? You have no dignity. Don't you know your own worth?" The girl replied arrogantly. "If I had a daughter, I would by all means find a wealthy man and marry him." "Where would you get one?" Her mother tried to turn the conversation into a joke. "You can't buy them at the store." "You haven't even tried looking." Her daughter looked at her angrily. "You don't need anything but your village." "You know what? I'm completely satisfied with my life." Her mother looked at her sternly. "And if you lack anything in your life, you must achieve it yourself." "I will," the girl shouted in fury. "You can rest assured I won't stay here." After this incident, Deborah Jones tried several times to talk calmly with her daughter, but she only snapped. One day, when Emily had finished school, she approached her mother. "I need money," she declared. I'm going to town. Well, where am I going to get it for you? Mother tried to explain the situation. You know we live on my salary alone. Borrow it from somebody, calmly replied the daughter. Von go to the Kurpatovs. And what will I pay back? The mother asked in amazement. Or are you going to pay them back yourself? There's more, Emily said arrogantly. Can't you even do that for me? You know, Emmy, her mother said angrily, I've already fulfilled all my obligations to you. You want to go to town, then you go do it yourself. Do you even? Shouted the daughter at her mother in a rage. I don't understand why you haven't been deprived of your maternal rights. What kind of mother are you? That's good. Deborah Jones looked her sternly in the eye. From this day forward, we'll live like neighbors. Wherever you like, that's where you can get your money for food. At first, Emily paid no attention to her mother's words, but what was her surprise when the woman no longer cooked anything and stopped buying groceries. Emily ate at her farm and took everything she bought there. After a few days, Emmy couldn't take it anymore and gave her mother a real scandal. What's the matter? Her mother replied calmly, You'll be 19 in 2 weeks. I've been working on a farm since I was 15, and nothing, she said. Do you know? The daughter shouted at the top of her voice, I'm going to make a mess of you. I'll file a report on you. The next day, she went to the local district police officer. She told a long and colorful story about how her mother oppresses her and doesn't give her food, the policeman said. Emmy, you are legally an adult. You are not disabled, so you have no claim to anything in your mother's house while she is alive. After sitting for a few days for tea and jam, the girl finally realized that her mother would no longer babysit her. She went to the neighbors and wanted to borrow money from them, but they refused her. Emmy, if you could work, who would mind? Said a tanned woman as she came out of the gate. So what are you going to pay back with? That night the mother couldn't bear it and decided to have a serious talk with her daughter. All right, Emmy, do you want to leave? She said. Then go out and work somewhere. In a year you'll have money, and then you can go wherever you want to go. Right now we need a man at the bakery and at our farm. Are you out of your mind? Emily screamed, like a madwoman. I'm going to carry more weights so that I can eat bread bought with the money I used to carry those weights. You didn't squander and eat, did you? Her mother, as stubborn as her father, looked at her sternly. I thought someone in town needed you, and there you are. Maybe I should find my father. The girl was glad. Then I could stay with him. He'd kill himself for a penny, and he wouldn't want you. Deborah Jones shook her head. How do you know? Maybe he's living well now, objected her daughter. He's in your town picking up bottles, laughed her mother. Our foreman saw him there recently, so if you want to go, go. Emily resisted for a few more days, but she didn't get the result she wanted. Finally, she accepted her mother's offer, but she made a condition. You don't know me from this day forward, so on the farm do not even come near me, said the girl unhappily. Do whatever you want. The mother waved her hand indifferently. I've had enough of your antics. So Emily and work began. At work, she never said a word to her mother, as if she didn't exist. The director was a red tape, so he looked for a young employee and began to take care of her. But Emmy remained indifferent to his attention. Then a month later, the boss took her to his office, but even then he failed. George Wilson, don't waste your time on me, Emily told him. I know my worth. A little over a year later, Emmy had made enough money to go to the city. She was finishing up her last 2 weeks of work. It was the beginning of summer, and one day an expensive car came by the farm. Emmy, come on, give me a hand, said the director, running out with some papers. A rich man had come there to look at the horses. The girl reluctantly got up from the table, looked in the mirror, and went outside. Wow, he has a car, she whistled. Where from? Why was he so rich? Emily fixed her hair and walked seductively toward the car. Hello, she said cheerfully. Welcome. We love guests. The elderly man looked at the girl carefully. And you have a treasure island here, he smiled at the stranger. John Smith. Emily was delighted when she shook his hand. And she called herself. "Aren't you going to show us your shows?" He looked her in the eye. "I will," she laughed. "Come on, come along. Our roads here are not very smooth, so be careful." "I'm not afraid of anything with you," replied John Smith. The guest took Emily under his arm. "Well, you see, I'm ready." The girl showed the visitors the farm for about an hour. Frankly speaking, the guest was only interested in horses, but he was immediately interested in the girl. He had already divorced his ex-wife a year ago, so he was in active search. In general, the girl did not notice how in 3 days John Smith offered her a job in Boston. It was a victory. "God, Boston," she rejoiced. "I never even thought about it. My dream was another city, and this was practically the capital. Yes, 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 God. I wish I hadn't missed this man." A week later, a man from Smith came to pick Emily up, and she got into an expensive car in front of the whole village and drove off to her new life. "I told you I was going to have a good life," she threw. Not that she threw, but at her mother as she walked her to the car. "Goodbye," Emily said, and slammed the door shut. But as smoothly as the girl had dreamed, she did not succeed. Her man rented her an apartment and provided for her for almost several years. Of course, Emily was happy. But the girl realized that as long as they are not officially signed, the man can leave her at any time. He hardly gave her any cash. Yes, John Smith paid all her expenses, but he dealt with the bills himself. Therefore, Emily had almost no money of her own. "If he comes tomorrow and tells me that's it," she said nervously, "where will I go then? I have no money to live in Boston." The girl used the most varied methods of seduction, but Smith was an experienced womanizer. He was in no hurry. He was satisfied with the fact that he had a young friend. For almost 2 years, Emily did not give up, and finally, her beloved offered her marriage. At last. "How happy I am," she shouted in delight. "Oh my God. You are the best. I hope you'll be satisfied now." "Yes, you shout loudly," he laughed, looking into the girl's eyes. "I am the happiest woman in the world." The girl didn't talk to anyone from the village, so no one knew she had finally made it. The first year she lived in Boston, her mother tried to talk to her, but it was all to no avail. Then Deborah Jones tried a few more times to call from a different number, but her daughter blocked it again. And if it hadn't been for chance, the mother would never have known how she was doing. One day after the wedding, Emily pulled up to the house and got out of the car. She was standing in the street outside her new home. Suddenly, some car labeled taxi stopped beside her. "Hey," Emmy said, someone's voice. "Is that you?" Ben, the girl, was surprised to see a boy from her village. "What are you, working in Boston?" "Well, yes," he answered cheerfully. "What are you doing here?" The guy looked in amazement at the girl's expensive clothes. "And I live here," she replied arrogantly. "Ben, you'll have to excuse me, but I have to go." Emmy quickly jumped into the car and pulled into the yard. The guy couldn't budge. "Wow," he scratched his head. "What? Did she marry a rich guy?" The girl very quickly forgot about the fact that she had met her fellow villager and went about her business. In fact, even though Emily had already become John Smith's official wife, she lived in constant tension. She kept getting the feeling that her husband was going to divorce her. Last week, she overheard 2 maids talking by accident. "I wonder how long this will last," one of them said through a laugh. "The last one here lasted about 2 years. You know, I heard that the master lived longest with his 3rd wife," said the second. "That's the one by whom he has his first son. He lives in America. Now, he lived with this one for 10 years. Wow," the first one marveled. "How did she last so long?" "I don't know how you can live with him at all," she whispered. "He looked at all women the same way." Emily shuddered. She knew she had to do something right away. She wasn't going to lose her husband. But the problem was that the girl was too young. Therefore, how to keep such a sophisticated man, she didn't know. "Honey, you work so much. You need to rest," Emmy told her husband one evening. "Let's go somewhere. Get a change of scenery." "Come on." He agreed easily. Or should we fly to Boston or Turkey? Of course, to Boston, his wife rejoiced. You promised me for so many years, but never took me there once. We'll fix that. John Smith hugged Emily. We don't have a problem with that, he smiled. 3 days later, they flew to Boston. It was not the first time Smith took Emily when they were not yet officially married. That girl accompanied him on vacation and in Europe, and Africa, and Taiwan, so she has already seen the world a little. Emily carefully prepared for this trip. She bought a new expensive dress, which her husband has not yet seen. She took her most revealing swimsuit with her. But no matter how hard Emmy tried, her husband occasionally looked at other women with, "Fuck you," scolded the girl. You wish that for yourself. Get out of here, or I'll call the guards. They'll explain everything to you in no time. Emily jerked the car sharply, and the woman barely managed to bounce aside. Deborah Jones stared after her daughter and shook her head. God forbid you get all that back, she pronounced, and wandered back the way she had come. She's come to lecture me here, Emmy paced angrily around her room. I have enough problems without her. The girl went downstairs, walked to the kitchen. There, the daily business of the day was simmering. When the landlady entered, everyone quieted down. She spun around, found nothing suitable for a scandal, and went into the living room. Darling, it's our anniversary today. Let's celebrate it with you, Emily said into the phone in an affectionate voice. What's our date today? I missed something, her husband wondered. Today is exactly 6 months since the best day of our lives, the wife laughed. We were married exactly 6 months ago. Oh, how quickly time has flown by. The man marveled. Well, all right, if you consider it an important date, then let's go out to a restaurant tonight. Thank you, my love, Emily rejoiced. Of course, it's very important to us. Besides, I need to walk out my new dress. In the evening, the driver took the couple to a restaurant. John was a fan of fine cuisine, and he liked to eat good food in general. Money allowed him to order the most exquisite dishes. Emily wore a gorgeous red dress. She looked like a passionate beauty. Wow, the man hugged his wife. I just now realized how happy I am with you, and this really needs to be celebrated. The couple walked into the restaurant and sat down at the reserved table. Everything was going well. Emily was just happy. But an hour later, a new couple entered the restaurant. The woman was simply dazzling. Her very deep cleavage on her back flaunted some racy details. Emily's husband looked at the stranger and was mesmerized. He hadn't taken his eyes off her all evening. Can't we go home already? Through tears, the wife said. I see you're not at all interested in me. And I think we could still stay, John Smith said without taking his eyes off the deep cut on the girl's back. You're just ignoring me, the spouse said angrily. After all, I am your wife, not that stranger. You're a woman, Emily. What do you want from me? The husband said unhappily. For me to be a leash dog. Then no, that's not going to happen. The man got up and left the restaurant. A few minutes later, he returned and paid the bill. If you want, come home with me. If not, then take a cab, John said calmly to his wife. Emily sat at a table in the restaurant and just sobbed. After about 5 minutes, she came to her senses and walked toward the restaurant exit. Halfway out, she turned sharply and looked hatefully at the girl in the revealing dress. For fuck's sake, she cursed to herself and walked out of the restaurant. Upset, she returned home, determined to have a serious talk with her husband. John, could we talk to you? She hugged her spouse. First of all, I love you very much. Second, it hurts me so much when you don't look at me, but at others. Are you jealous? He laughed. But it's healthy. Emily, I'm a man, I'm a male, and despite my age, I'm in good shape. So it's natural for me to look at pretty girls. Emily uttered in bewilderment, well, what about me? Don't I mean anything to you anymore, Emmy? He replied. Are you my wife? If you meant nothing to me, then I wouldn't have married you at all. Then you still love me, she embraced her husband with joy. Of course I do, answered John Smith, and kissed her. Now your soul is at peace. But Emily had only had enough for a few weeks. After that, she began to feel threatened by all young women again. I must think of something, the girl persisted, rummaging through her closet. Should I switch to a maxi? She tried on one dress. I look amazing in it. That evening, Emily and her husband went to a concert. Her long dress conquered all of her husband's acquaintances. The girl bathed in attention. Suddenly, across from them, on the balcony, she saw a young woman about 27 years old. Her face was as if crying. The stranger was perfect. The girl looked sharply at her husband. John Smith's face was simply glowing. Emily blackened with anger, her face contorted, and she gloomily looked at everyone spitefully. "How do you like our neighbor on the opposite balcony?" she asked her husband snidely when they got home. "Who was sitting there?" John Smith replied in surprise. "You know, I didn't even notice." "John, will you stop lying to me?" the girl shouted. "I've seen the way you've been looking at her all evening." "Emily, are you imagining things again?" Her husband looked at her sternly. "Please calm down, and we'll talk afterward." This was not the last time this would happen. There had been so many such incidents in Emily's life that she had stopped counting them. It had been 3 years since she'd been married to Smith. Jealousy was eating her up more and more. The girl had grown 3 years older, and now it seemed to her that her husband no longer needed her. "Lord, what is this?" She looked in the mirror in horror. "Is it wrinkles?" The girl dropped the little mirror and walked over to the huge mirror on the wall. "What's that wrinkle on my forehead?" Stupefied with shock, she said, "How old I am." The girl quickly dialed a familiar number and arranged to undergo a very powerful treatment today to smooth her skin. "Look at this." Emily poked her finger at the area above her upper lip. "And there's a crease forming here. The bags under your eyes. I'm begging you, do something. Stop me getting old." "No way. You're so young. Your face looks no older than 18. "What are you talking about?" "I just turned 25 the other day," Emmy said through tears. "Who's going to want me now?" "Don't worry. We'll fix all that now," the master assured her. "We'll smooth out all the wrinkles, remove the bags under your eyes." A couple hours later, Emily looked in the mirror satisfied. "That's better," she smiled. "That's how I like myself." A very important date was approaching. It was soon to be 3 years since the girl had married John Smith. It was a real anniversary to her. She had worked so hard to keep her family together. It seemed to her that her scandals had not gone in vain, and during this time she had somewhat reined in her spouse. At least he had stopped looking at others so openly. Perhaps his age was already taking its toll, Emily thought. I have maybe another 5 years left, and then I can count on his fortune. Lord, how much strength I have given him. How much of my nerves he has wasted. The spouses decided to celebrate their anniversary in a luxurious country house. And let's have a real ball, the girl suggested. Can you imagine how beautiful all the women will be in gorgeous open dresses? She asked. In open dresses, you say? He scratched his head. Why? I agree. All the guests had been warned that for the anniversary they would need, so to speak, a dress code. The house was specially prepared for the occasion. The ceiling hung festive chandeliers. The large hall was decorated in the Rococo style. Everything looked simply magnificent. The hostess received the guests in a stunning dress, which she sewed herself to order. The guests whispered, "This has never happened before. This is just great. John Smith is beyond the competition." The guests enjoyed the meal, and the ball began. The cavaliers began to ask the ladies to dance. It was noticeable that those present were very excited, trying not to hit the dirt. The master of the house defiantly approached his wife, and they inaugurated the ball with the first dance. "Gosh, it's good to have a professional teacher and me to work with," rejoiced Emily. "Otherwise we would have gotten tangled up in our own feet and embarrassed ourselves." After his dance, John couldn't catch his breath for a long time. He decided not to take any more risks and sat down in a luxurious chair, watching the ladies. Suddenly a young lady, about 19 or 20 years old, with a childish face, entered the hall. She was dressed in a simple silk dress. An unpretentious hairstyle only emphasized the beauty of her appearance. The master of the ball froze, not taking his eyes off her. Choosing the right moment, he approached the stranger and extended his hand. "Allow me to introduce myself, lovely creature. What is your name?" Amanda, the girl, blushed and accepted her beau's hand. Emily was chatting merrily with some ladies when she suddenly noticed that her husband's chair was empty. She looked around anxiously and saw John telling something to a young lady, and the latter laughing sonorously. "Who is that girl?" the hostess asked one of the women. "I have no idea. I don't know her," she replied. In truth, Emily didn't really care that much who the stranger was. She was intently watching her spouse's every move. He didn't seem to notice anyone around him and looked genuinely happy. "My God, has he never settled down?" whispered the hostess of the ball. Emily could hardly contain her fury. At last the dance was over. John kissed his partner's hand with pleasure and whispered something in her ear. The girl flushed at first, then nodded in agreement. His consort came swiftly toward him. "Who is this prankster with whom you have been dancing?" "Why should I?" "But you're the one who started this ball, and it's customary to dance at a ball," her husband replied calmly, and headed for the champagne table. Emily wanted to add something, but decided to wait for the right moment. All evening she kept her eyes on John, and it seemed that the stranger and he were casting meaningful glances at each other. Unable to bear it, she approached her spouse again. "Explain what all this means. Are you flirting with young girls on our anniversary?" Emily, please don't start. John looked at her coldly. "Let's talk about this later. Don't ruin my mood." The ball continued for a few more hours, and the satisfied guests began to disperse. "That was amazing." John the Cavaliers thanked their host, shaking his hand firmly. Emily Jones, "Thank you for a real ball," kissed the cheek of the hostess by the ladies. The master of ceremonies was rubbing his hands together, looking at the smartly dressed ladies with interest. Only Emily alone was not happy. She was impatiently waiting for the last guest to leave her house, so that she could tell everything to her husband. The farewell to the guests seemed to last indefinitely. At last the last car started outside the gate, and the servants set about cleaning the hall. "John, what is the meaning of all this?" Emily looked sternly at her husband. "Emmy, you wanted me to have fun at the ball, didn't you? What do you want from me now?" he replied coldly. "Thank you. I enjoyed it all. Now, I want to rest." "Who was that maiden with whom you danced?" She wouldn't back down. "Who invited her?" "How should I know? I have invited so many people." "Probably someone's daughter," he answered angrily. "So you didn't even know her name?" Emmy said snidely. "I'll never believe it. You've been looking at her the whole holiday. So now she claims even my sight." John Smith said grudgingly. "But, you know," the man walked slowly toward the exit. His wife ran after him and shouted something on the way. She was waving her arms in a frenzy and would not calm down for days to come. The husband tried to ignore his wife's tantrums during this time, but it was evident that his patience was running out. "Emmy, I'm going to sleep in my room for the time being," John Smith said to her one evening. "What nonsense is that?" she objected. "We are so well together." "Emily, did you hear what I said?" Her husband looked at her coldly. Between Smith and his wife grew an iceberg. The girl made a new visit to a beauty salon and an elite boutique, but it no longer helped her. After this conversation, her husband had grown cold to her. "What should I do now?" Emily sobbed. "He stopped noticing me at all." She tried new tactics, but she could never get John back in her good graces. "John, my love, why don't we go away? I can see that you are very tired," somehow caring wife said to him. "Let's go to a resort. I'll accompany you." "Emmy." "Thank you." He looked at the girl. "But your care will sooner finish me than cure. I love you so much, Kitty. I love you so much." She tried to hug him. "That's why I want to take care of you. I do not need anything from you," her husband replied dryly and left. "What an old fool." Emily was hysterical. "What is he up to? He hasn't said anything to me lately." She had a bad feeling. She began to watch her husband. One day Emily changed into a sports uniform, wore glasses. She wore a strange hat on her head. After her husband left, she got into a cab following his car. "Please," the girl said sternly. just so her driver doesn't see us. John Smith drove into the courtyard of the luxury house. Emily looked at it with surprise. It was a multi-story building, and apparently someone had an apartment here. After all, her husband had rented an apartment for her before she was married. An hour or two later, her husband's car pulled out of the yard and headed for the stables. "Oh shit," Emily scolded. "Who lives there? Had he found someone?" "Judging by the fact that he hasn't spoken to me lately, it's possible." She was in a bad mood. She knew her life as Smith's wife was hanging in the balance. If John had already found someone else, she was in a bad way. Emmy decided to eavesdrop on his conversation sometime. She took out some kind of device and placed it on the door to her husband's room that evening. Well, of course it came to her. "I miss you very much too. I'll pick you up at 5 tomorrow and we'll go to a restaurant for some French food. We'll walk around a bit and then we'll come back to your place." Emily wanted to burst in on her husband, but quickly stopped. She was determined to catch him red-handed tomorrow. What she heard shocked her. It was clear that her husband had taken a mistress, which meant that Emily wouldn't have long to live. "You old goat," she said angrily, "when you die. When they come for you and take you to the other world." All night the girl could not sleep a wink. She urgently needed to do something. But having grown up a little, Emmy began to realize that it would be very difficult to get her husband back. She waited until the next night, hailed a cab, and showed up at the restaurant in her plain clothes. Emily had no doubt that John Smith would bring his new fling here. He'd never been particularly imaginative. It was almost 6 o'clock in the evening when her husband's familiar car showed up outside Legrand's restaurant. Emily held her breath and pressed herself against the cab window. John got out of the car and gallantly offered his hand to the young lady with whom he had danced at the ball. What a scoundrel. The girl couldn't stand it. He's even younger than he is. He himself has sand falling from everywhere, and he still cannot calm down. The stranger was really pretty. She radiated youth, a smile of innocence on her childish face. John took his lady under his arm and led her into the restaurant. A few minutes later, Emily followed them as well. The girl could hardly contain herself. She wanted to pounce on her husband's young mistress. But she knew that would only make things worse. Now she needed to find out how serious were the intentions of her husband towards this person. The lovers were seated at an isolated table, so they did not notice the girl. "You don't have to worry about anything," John said sternly to his new woman. "Clothes, food, salons, all that is only my concern. By the way, I want to tell you that soon you and I will fly to Paris. I'll show you our house. He bought a house in Paris for his mistress. "Oh my God," Emily repeated in fright. So he was serious with her. The girl wanted to run out of the restaurant, but decided to wait a little longer. "Well, what are you, my love?" Embarrassed, said the stranger. "You have done so much for me. I love you so much. I still can't forgive myself that I lied to you then. Well, if I hadn't managed to sneak into your ball, we would never have met. So I'm begging you to forget about it. I found out by accident that there was a ball at your house. I overheard my hosts talking while I was cleaning the parlor. You know, my love, it's like I've got wings behind me. I was determined to get there at any cost, so I had to lie about being the daughter of someone you know. The most important thing is that we are together, and the rest is nothing." John stroked her hand. "Oh my God, she worked as a servant," Emily said in amazement. "John, you're sinking lower and lower." The girl realized she didn't want to listen to any more of their amorous ramblings. Gloomy, she returned home. "What am I going to do now?" Emmy asked herself. "My husband is in love, so I don't matter to him anymore. Of course, maybe in a month or two he'll grow cold to her, and we'll live normally again. But what if he doesn't?" Emily had a hard time imagining what would happen to her if her husband's affair grew into something more. She made the decision that she needed to calm down and just wait. So she endured for almost 3 days, but then the girl just snapped out of it. "You thought I wouldn't find out you had a mistress," she shouted at the top of her voice. "Emmy," her husband told her calmly, "for 3 years of living with you, I have heard nothing but reproaches. You lie. I gave you all my youth. Everything I did was for your sake." The wife screamed in rage. "How dare you treat me like this? You don't have to lecture me here," John Smith looked at her sternly. Stop it. While I'm still in control. Am I walking away from you? Emily asked in amazement. I have given so much of myself to you. How can you be so ungrateful? Are you talking to me about gratitude? Angry husband. But you 3 years as a parasite on my neck sat on my neck. Your jealousy almost drove me crazy, but you want to know the truth. Then you should know that no matter what kind of wife I had, I always had lovers on the side. And if you'd realized that from the beginning, you'd have lived happily ever after with me. What are you saying? Between us, what? It's over, the wife said in shock. Did you bring me to this? Smith replied coldly. I've had enough of this. How could you do that? Cheers, sobbed the girl. I love you, Emmy. If you knew how many women I've been with, you wouldn't be talking such nonsense. He laughed. You just sold yourself for my money, and you didn't value your happiness. I beg you. Give me a second chance, the wife begged. I promise I'll do it. Emmy, do not lie, said the husband in anger. I think our conversation is over. Are you just going to leave me like this, dumbfounded? Girl, do you even realize what you are doing, old fool? It's all right. I'll take my share from you. You owe me compensation for stealing my youth. I didn't take anything from you, he shouted. Ungrateful beasts. I was going to give you an apartment and enough money for one last time, but now you're going to leave this house with what you came in with. Smith quickly grabbed his cell phone and dialed the right number. He's going to block all of my wife's accounts right now, take everything away from her, and start divorce proceedings. You just threw me out on the street with nothing. Emily couldn't believe it. You can take your bag and only the clothes you're wearing. In 5 minutes, I'm expecting you to go out, John said coldly. Take off all your jewelry and watch. Don't steal anything. My guard will definitely check you out. Emily was so shocked that she couldn't even say a word. She slowly wandered to her room, put her papers in her bag, and took one last look. A guard approached her and searched her. All clear, Johnny said, turning to the host. This is for you for sharing 3 years of your life with me, pronounced the husband and slipped something into the girl's hand. The gate closed behind Emily. Smith was a man of principle, and she only now realized it. The girl opened her palm. There lay 10,000. What a prick, she reprimanded. I don't even have enough to rent an apartment. Emily was lost, wandering somewhere. She just didn't know what she was going to do now. She had never had anything. Everything she lived on had always belonged to her husband. The girl had been wandering around the city of Boston for several hours when it began to get dark. She saw herself standing at the bus station. Emily realized that she had nowhere else to go but to her mother's house. She bought herself a ticket and boarded the shuttle bus. What's going to happen to me now? She sobbed. Where am I going to live now? It was about 11 o'clock when Emmy knocked on the familiar gate. The village was completely silent. Even the young people were already hiding in their houses. Who was out there? The light came on and Deborah Jones appeared on the porch. It's me, Emily replied quietly. The woman stepped out into the yard in amazement. Standing before her was her daughter. The mother couldn't believe her eyes. What do you want here? She asked dryly. Why did you come here? Are you going to keep me outside like this? Said the daughter unhappily. Well, come in, replied Deborah calmly. We'll spend the night tonight, and tomorrow morning we'll talk to you. After a life of luxury, Emmy lay down in her old bed. Tears streamed from her eyes. Maybe he'll change his mind yet, she dreamed. In a month he'll dump his Amanda Wilkins and come for me. Yeah, that's right. I just have to wait a little while. So why did you come to see me? Mother asked in the morning. What? Did your rich man kick you out? No, Emily replied angrily. John and I decided to renew our relationship and live apart from each other for a month. John likes romance, so he came up with the idea. He wants to come visit me here, as if it were the first time. Couldn't he get you an apartment in Boston? Deborah Jones hesitated. I understand he has a lot of money. The rich like to recreate past events, replied the daughter arrogantly. He found me here, not in Boston. Well then, let him rent you an apartment here. Deborah Jones didn't believe her. It'll be practically free for him here. He wants me to live in your house, Emily said angrily. He wants things to be realistic. And who is he? Exactly, the woman said angrily. This is my house, and I make my own rules, and your presence doesn't fit in here at all. You wanted me to be happy. You just have to be patient for a month, and he will take me away from here. The girl looked at her mother angrily. I realize you're talking nonsense, but okay, you can stay in my house for a month, her mother finally agreed. But remember, I don't care what your husband wants. I'm the one who sets the rules here. While her mother was tending to the garden, Emily discreetly took her cell phone and called her husband. Hello, darling, she said as if nothing had happened. How are you? How are you doing, Emmy? What's all this drama for? Came an angry voice in the receiver. I told you everything yesterday. Don't get your hopes up. It's over between us. But something the girl wanted to say when the phone went off. Old jerk, we'll see about that, she said angrily. Her mother left for work, and Emily was completely immersed in her thoughts. She needed to come up with a plan to get her husband back. Naturally, she couldn't stay in the village, and she didn't want to. She hid her remaining money. Oh shit, the girl was cursing. In the refrigerator, what kind of food is this? She opened the lid of the pot and sniffed. Emily barely fried herself some scrambled eggs and went to bed. In the evening, her mother came home from work. I hope with your big money you'll be able to eat on your own, she looked at her daughter. I'm on a diet now, Emmy said over the loud noises in her stomach. I need to lose about 4 pounds. Deborah Jones didn't answer her. She immediately realized that something about the whole thing was wrong. It was about 12 when some rustling was heard in the kitchen. Deborah Jones woke up. Did some thief break in? She whispered fearfully. Scary, but we should check it out. The woman cautiously crept into the kitchen and turned on the light. Emily was sitting at the table, shoveling something into her mouth. Diet, you say? Did you think I wouldn't find out anything? Deborah Jones was angry. Emmy, stop making a fool of me. Go ahead and tell me all about what you've been pestering me about. Don't worry, shouted the daughter. I'll be out of here in a month. And you won't see me again. You won't, her mother answered her. Emmy, stop playing comedy. Do you think I'm going to stay in this hole? The latter shouted furiously. You don't know me very well. For my trouble, I know you too well, replied Deborah Jones calmly. Stop lying. Did your husband kick you out of the house? Who told you such nonsense? The girl was amused. You can't understand the life of rich people. It's you who live here like a herd. You drove your husband away, continued the mother. Who could get along with someone like you? What do you think you're doing? Emily shouted. Who are you anyway? And what do you know about me? Everything, replied the mother briefly. And that your husband kicked you out of the house because of your bad temper. You and him are no longer together, Emmy. And what's left? You have nothing. And you have no money. But have you and your gossip here lost your heads? The girl would not give up. How could such a thing even be thought of? Emmy, her mother said to her at last, is your husband officially divorced from you? He called me today. You must have been talking to him from my phone. That's why he thought it was you. I know all about it, that you're never coming back to Boston, that he'll never take you back, that you have nothing. He asked for an address to send the divorce papers to. Daughter. Is this the end? The mother said. Who the hell are you to judge me? Emily yelled hysterically. Don't you know anything about us at all? Today he divorced me, and tomorrow he'll take me back to his place. Your games are over, her mother sighed. You only came here because you have nowhere else to go. I could leave your house even now. The girl arrogantly began to throw something into her bag. I won't be lost without you, the mother said. No one is keeping you here, she pointed with her hand to the door. But remember, if you leave here now, you won't be coming back. The girl stopped. She turned around and walked slowly to her room. And another thing, her mother looked at her. If you stay here, you will live by my rules. and that means doing chores and getting a job to support yourself. I'm not going to let you loiter any longer. We'll see about that." Emily whispered angrily, "I won't put up with you." She slammed the door to her room defiantly, burst into tears, and collapsed on the bed. "So he divorced me after all," she said through her tears. "Maybe he'll change his mind and come back for me. Damn mother found out about everything. I mustn't let it show that I'm dependent on her now. Let her work her own farm. And I won't. We'll see who's who." Deborah Jones sat down on the sofa. The woman realized that if she indulged her daughter again, she would be of no use to her. "I'd rather be a good mother to God than to Emmy," she said. "I'm not getting off her again from this day forward. Either she'll finally learn something, or she'll go to waste. There'll be nothing in the middle. I've tried this for so many years." The next morning, the woman got up early for work, walked into her daughter's room, who was still asleep. "While you are at home, the tomatoes in the vegetable garden and in the shed have disappeared. Put things in order," the mother sternly ordered. "Are you out of your mind?" screamed at her daughter in anger. "I will do nothing." "Then have you out of the house by the time I come," replied Deborah Jones coldly. "I've warned you. The way you used to live doesn't concern me. You are now living in my house. So either you obey or get out." The girl shouted something after her, but her mother did not listen to her. She took her bag and went to work. Deborah Jones had not been herself all day. She felt sorry for her daughter, of course, but she had to stay cool. "Let her be thankful I'm still feeding her," she thought. "She's never spent a penny on me in her life." Even when she lived rich, Emmy never thought of her mother. Here, let her make it up for herself now. It was about lunchtime when the girl rose grudgingly. She ate the cabbage pie with great relish and began to think what she should do next. "I'll just go and see," she muttered to herself as she went out into the vegetable garden. "I won't do anything to her." Emily looked around the tomato plantation and turned pale. The mess among the bushes, and with a sigh of relief, went to her room. "Wait," she thought. "You need it. You pick it yourself." All day the girl lay in bed, continuously watching TV. In the evening her mother came home from work. "What is this?" heard the daughter like thunder mother's voice. "Emmy, come here quickly." "What do you want?" shouted the girl unhappily from her room. Deborah Jones came into her, seized her by the arm, and dragged her into the kitchen. "There are no servants here," she shouted. "Everyone cleans up after themselves here." The woman poked her finger at the dirty dishes on the table. "Fuck you. If you have to clean up, you clean up," Emily reprimanded. The woman quickly ran into her daughter's room, grabbed her bag, and pulled her daughter outside by the arm, glaring angrily at her. "Get out of my house. Get out of here," she shouted. "Your foot will never set foot in my house again." Emily snapped at her for another long moment, picked up her bag, and went somewhere else. But there was nowhere to go. It was starting to get dark outside. The girl was frightened. "Where am I going to live now?" she sobbed. "What if someone kills me here at night? Lord, what am I going to do now?" Emmy spent the worst night of her life. She sat on a bench near her mother in the yard. By morning, she fell asleep on it. "I told you to get out of here," she heard Deborah Jones' angry voice above her in the morning. "Where am I supposed to go?" Emily cried. "I have no one but you." "What has gotten through to you at last?" her mother said to her. "You are only just now remembering it." "I was so scared this night," the girl said quietly. "All right, I'll clean up after myself and do the work you tell me to do." Deborah Jones stood silently, not knowing what to say to her. She didn't really believe that Emmy could change, but she felt sorry for her daughter. "Okay, come on in," she said quietly. "I hope you'll wash the dishes and clean up the barn today." "Okay," the girl nodded her head. The mother left for work, and the daughter hurried into the house. This night proved to be a turning point for her. The fear of staying on the streets had shown her that something needed to change in herself. Emily decided that she would stay with her mother for now, and then, when she had earned some money, she would go to Boston. She hoped her husband would run out of romance and fall in love with her again. "Aunt Deb, they say Emmy's back." A tall, tanned guy asked the woman. "How is she?" "Oh, nothing. Just had her fate tested. so the hubris is off her. You can talk to her normally now, smiled the milkmaid. Maybe she'll talk to me too, he blushed and lowered his eyes. Alex Galen was Emily's classmate. For as long as he could remember, he'd always loved her, but the girl never noticed him. She never even said hello to him. And when the guy found out that Emmy married some rich man, his dream died. He never got married after that. Alex, you're a nice guy, Emmy's mother looked at him. But knowing my daughter, I'd wish you a better girl. She's a hard girl to deal with. Aunt Deb, I've known Emmy since she was a little girl. I love her. I can't help it, he said and turned away. Good for her. Let her recover a little more from her luxurious life. Then you can come visit us, the woman suggested and patted the boy on the shoulder. For the first week of her new life, Emily spoke to her mother through gritted teeth. She did her best to keep her cool. The fear of being on the streets again helped her do that. But at the end of the first week, Emily did give her mother a scandal. Are you kidding me? She yelled in a frenzy. I already wash my own dishes every day. What more do you want? Emmy, do you like to eat? So from tomorrow on, let's cook on your own, Mother said sternly. As long as you're not working, you'll help me around the house. What am I, your servant? Cried Emmy in a rage. And do you think it could be any other way? Deborah Jones grinned. There's no one here to clean up after you, and no one to cook either. You'll learn to cook at the same time. You're out of your mind, the girl wanted to tell her mother to her face, but stopped herself. What am I going to cook? I can't do anything but scramble eggs. Well, I guess you can handle fried potatoes, smiled the mother. I have faith in you. That's it. I've got to go to work. God, how am I supposed to put up with you? Scolded Emily after her mother left. Today, Emmy's assignment from her mother was to do laundry and fry potatoes for dinner. Well, what is it? The girl picked up some jar labeled Palmyra in surprise. How do you wash with this? She opened a new jar with difficulty, and so poked at the paste with her fingers. Ugh, it's gross, she was indignant. Is it really possible to wash clothes with this? The girl took half a bucket of hot water off the stove, poured it into a large basin. God, what kind of Middle Ages do they have here? She was angry. They're still doing laundry here by hand. Emily turned down the water, threw in half a can of paste, threw all the laundry in the basin, and retired to her room. After about 3 hours, she remembered her laundry and walked over to the basin. What is this? She looked at her yellow blouse in horror. Where did that blue stain come from? Lord, it's all stained. The large amount of product in the too hot water had caused all of the almost clothes to water paint. What the hell, cussed the girl. How can anyone even live here? She stared in shock at the rag-like laundry hanging on the wire, scratched her head, and went into the house. It was Emily's own fault. You shouldn't have made me work. Emmy excused herself. It was about 4 o'clock. The girl went to the kitchen, brought a bucket of potatoes, began to peel them. Well, I've peeled the potatoes. What am I going to do with it now? Perplexed, she asked. How do you even fry them? Emily tried to cut the potatoes with a knife, but they slipped out of her hands and fell to the floor. How do they do that? She was angry. They're so slippery. They're impossible to cut. The girl spotted a small axe in the kitchen and hit the potato with all her might. That's it. That is, Emmy rejoiced as the potato shattered into pieces. Now, I'm going to make it. She chopped up the potatoes in big chunks and threw them into the skillet. She poured oil into it, put the lid on, and went to her room. She realized it when there was a smell of burning in her room. It must have been about 2 hours. She ran out into the kitchen. It was filled with puffs of black smoke. Oh my God, rushed the girl to the stove. What's going to happen now? Emmy opened the door. When her mother appeared in the wicket, the woman looked anxiously at her daughter. Emmy, what's the matter with you? She asked worriedly. Is it all your fault? Emily pounced on her mother. You told me to fry potatoes. You know I can't cook, don't you? The woman rushed into the kitchen and brought out a skillet, and in it were potatoes burned to blackness. Quickly, she poured cold water over the pan and shook her head. She was about to go into the house when she noticed the laundry on the rope. "My God, what have you done?" the woman uttered in shock. "That's my robe and exit dress. And just where does that girl get her hands from?" Emily was ready for a fight. She was sure her mother would give her a scandal, but to her surprise, Deborah Jones said nothing, quickly prepared dinner, and went to her room in silence. A week passed, and Emily finally learned how to fry potatoes. She even took a swing at borscht. "It's really good," too. Her mother dipped her spoon into the red liquid with big chunks of cabbage. "You're just great." The girl kept struggling, but despite all her failures, her mother praised her for her work. "Clever daughter," said the mother, all the plums collected. "And now let's make compote." Emily tried to ward off these thoughts, but more and more often she thought that maybe she didn't have to go back to Boston. "Emmy, what are you doing?" she said to herself. "Do you want to spend all your youth in this dump?" What her mother said one evening: "We've got girls starting to go on vacation. They need to be replaced. If you want, you can work for a couple months, but not until October at the latest. And you'll have money for personal expenses. Don't hustle by." The girl wanted to refuse at first, but after a little thought, decided to accept her offer. "That way I'll be able to save up for Boston and finally get away from here," she thought to herself. Emily accepted her mother's offer. She accepted the offer, and they started going to work together. It was Friday when mother and daughter were coming home one day. "Something in town didn't work out for you," the women gathered gossip on the street. "Judging by the fact that you came home, your rich man left you," they laughed. Emily drew in a full breath and was about to tell everyone to go to hell when her mother made a sign with her hand. "Dusha, shut your mouth. You stink too much," Deborah Jones said coldly. "Your sick fantasy is of no use to anyone here." Emily looked at Deborah Jones in amazement. For the first time in her life, she noticed concern on her mother's part. "Thank you," she said in the evening. "I didn't expect you to stand up for me." "Emmy, well, I'm your mother." Deborah Jones looked at her. "It's my duty to protect my daughter." That day something broke in Emily. The girl felt as if she could breathe easier. The next day she stood up. "Happy, Mom. Let me help you." She approached the woman as she pulled the heavy bucket. "Thank you." The mother smiled too. "Let's do it together. It's very heavy." Deborah Jones noticed a change in her daughter. Like a child, she was excited about this and that. "Why don't we bake your favorite cake this weekend?" her mother once suggested to her daughter. "Shall we?" The girl agreed. "Remember how I as a child whisked homemade sour cream, and then the cream licked off my fingers? How delicious it was to me then." Emily, of course, never got rid of her temper, but she began to notice that it became easier and easier to control herself. Emmy learned to keep silent, and in time the girl realized what incredible advantages from this she now had. She was not hurt by the neighbors' harsh words, nor annoyed by the cows on the farm, nor frightened by her work. "Emmy, hello." Once the girl heard someone's voice behind her. "And Alex, hello." Smiling, she answered. "You're probably wondering why I came home too. And why did my rich husband kick me out of the house?" The girl looked intently into his eyes. "No," simply answered the guy. "I do not care where and with whom you lived. What do I care about that?" Emmy looked at the guy without taking her eyes off. She wanted to find some deceit in him, but soon realized that the guy spoke sincerely. "What about you, Alex?" she finally asked. "Already married, I guess? Do you have kids?" "No," he shook his head negatively. "I haven't met my one and only." "Why not?" Emmy laughed. "Do you have too many demands? Is a man loved for something external?" He looked at her seriously. "For the face, for the figure," Emily smiled. "And the rest is nothing." "I don't agree with you." Alex Galen looked the girl straight in the eyes. "Truly love is always just like that." The guy turned around and left. Emily looked after him for a long time. "What is this love for?" sighed the girl. "It only causes problems. You should not live with your heart, but with your head." The girl had been working on the farm for about a month. When at lunchtime Alex appeared on the farm again, The guy was a tractor driver in the collective farm and sometimes brought fodder to the cattle. His main duty was to work on the tractor in the field. Alex, hello. Deborah Jones was happy. How are you doing? Can you give me a little? Everything is all right, the guy replied cheerfully. Now they've started harvesting corn. I see. So you're pretty busy right now, said Emmy at her mother. And you wanted something. Seeing the disappointment on the woman's face, the boy asked. Yes, I wanted to hire you to hammer up a fence, she replied. We have such holes in our factories, then dogs, then someone's boars. They're always climbing into the garden. Okay, he said simply. I'll do it. Let's do it next weekend. Deborah Jones cheered up. She thanked the boy and he went off to unload the silage for the cows. What a nice guy, said her mother with a smile. He doesn't drink. He doesn't smoke. He doesn't go out. Why? Emily stared at her mother in amazement. Only he's been in love with you for a long time. The mother looked into her daughter's eyes. Would you two make a good couple? Mom, would you? Replied her daughter angrily. Or do you really think I'll stay in this village? And what do I need him for? I'm going to Boston soon. All right, said the mother calmly. The main thing is that he will fix the fence. The weather was clear. It was early August. At 9 o'clock, someone knocked on the gate. Emily looked out and saw Alex, waved to him. The boy came into the yard. It was obvious that he was worried. Emmy, hi. Alex was happy to see the girl. I came to work with you. What I need will take a couple of hours. Could you help me? Alex, the mother, asked her daughter. Maybe there are some boards that need to be held there. The girl agreed, and she and the guest went to the end of the vegetable garden. Alex easily used the tools. He became very hot, and he took off his t-shirt. Wow, Emily thought. What kind of body does he have? Pumped muscles and strong arms. And he's all right. Emmy, hold this right here. A guy's voice interrupted her thoughts. I'll go around the other side. You're so good at it. The girl couldn't stand it and praised Alex. Yes, every man can handle it, he laughed, revealing snow-white teeth. What do you usually do here in the village? Do you go out for a walk or to the club for a disco? By the way, does it still work? Yes, probably 2 years ago it was closed, Alex answered sadly. So there is really nothing for local young people to do here. I read books in the evenings. You like to read? Emmy was surprised. Frankly speaking, I didn't expect from you. Well, what do you like? Well, I like classics and science fiction, he answered and added Ray Bradbury, the Strugatsky brothers, Roger Zelazny. Well, tell me something, Emily suddenly suggested. Let's do Bradbury. All right, let's start with the classics. 451 degrees Fahrenheit, he laughed. I think this book reflects very well what will happen to us if we do not develop, do not read, stop striving for something new. The boy and the girl had finished mending the fence, but their discussion about the book was still going on. Emmy brought them some compote and put a plate with pies in front of Alex. You understand, Alex said, biting into a pie. There must be novelty in everything. It is the law of life. If you don't evolve, sooner or later there will be a failure. The famous second law of thermodynamics also speaks about it in a closed system. Entropy, that is, chaos, begins to increase. And what do you think? Does it apply to everything? Emily marveled. Yes, even human relationships. Hello, Emily, Jason grumbled, looking at the unkempt-looking girl standing in the hallway behind his wife. You're always bringing strange people into our house. Give her a couple bucks and tell her to get out of here. The wife looked at Jason reproachfully, without a word. The girl suddenly reached out from behind Emily's back and clasped an old photograph in her hand. Jason's face changed as he looked at the photo, and he couldn't hold back his feelings. In the corners of the old photo, two happily smiling young faces were staring back at him. Jason immediately recognized himself as the young man in the photo and the carefree girl next to him. the ex-girlfriend he had once sneakily dumped when he found out she was pregnant. The dirty girl behind Emily's back was staring at him with piercing blue eyes, the eyes of the same unhappy girl he'd left alone and pregnant years ago. There was no doubt in his mind that this was his daughter. More than once afterward, Jason had made excuses for himself: youth, inexperience. But there was another reason why he had flatly rejected the possibility of recognizing the future child and taking responsibility for her appearance. Not long before, Jason had met another girl, Emily. Their acquaintance began with an accidental collision on the street. From surprise, the girl dropped her bag and there was a ringing sound of broken glass. Jason apologetically helped her to collect her things. He noticed that Emily was slender, well-dressed, and very pretty. Jason walked her home, and they began to socialize, dating. Soon Jason was surprised to learn that Emily was the daughter of the director of the factory where he worked. Jason, who had grown up in a poor family of drunkards and lived in an orphanage from time to time, could not believe his happiness. Even as a child, he had given himself his word that he would never repeat the fate of his desperately poor parents, and he had forgotten about that decision. This is my chance, Jason thought, determined to change his life with the help of his new acquaintance. However, there remained an ex-girlfriend he saw no place for in his new life. The news of her pregnancy made Jason furious. How dare she interfere and take away his chance? Who was she anyway? And it's unclear if it's his child. In desperation, her ex-girlfriend sobbed, "I know why you're leaving me, because of Emily. I know who she is and I understand why you're courting her. But don't you really care what happens to me and the baby?" Jason was adamant. He sternly advised his ex to get an abortion and find a new boyfriend who was better suited for her than he was. He had no doubt that Emily was in love with him, and they would be married soon. Jason could already see himself in his new status, dreaming of an expensive car and a tightly stuffed wallet, glaring at the people around him with superiority. Realizing that Jason had made up his mind, his ex-girlfriend cursed him in a rage, promising that this evil would return to him and no girl would ever be able to bear him children again, not even someone as cool as Emily. In response, Jason only laughed at her, saying dismissively, "Why, you're also a mental idiot. Did I dump you right?" He left, but the words she'd said never went away and sometimes bothered him, though he reassured himself that he couldn't have done otherwise. After the lavish wedding, the couple lived in the spacious apartment the bride's father had bought. Jason's business had really taken off. His wife's father, approving of her choice, immediately appreciated Jason's desire to succeed in life and assisted him in every possible way. Thanks to his father-in-law's connections and patronage, Jason started his own business, which successfully developed. Money appeared in the family. Jason bought a good car, made gifts to his wife, and did not forget himself. Emily adored her husband, felt over the seventh heaven of happiness, and really wanted children. 3 years passed, then 5. However, so ardently desired by her pregnancy did not come. The couple were healthy. Doctors found no reason for the lack of children in their family. Emily repeatedly offered to take a foster child from an orphanage. However, each time Jason was adamantly opposed. Such a child would be a living reminder of his own childhood, which he so always wanted to forget. He also remembered the curses his pregnant ex-girlfriend had hurled at him. As if he wanted to prove that her prediction was nonsense, he persisted in convincing his wife that they were still young and they would have children. But as the years passed, the couple came to terms with their childlessness, and Jason gradually forced himself not to think about those curses and his ex-girlfriend at all. And now it was as if the past had reappeared in front of him, as if it were real. Jason stared at him with the piercing blue eyes of his unexpectedly blue-eyed daughter, and he was silent, unable to find the words. "Jason, I know everything." Emily interrupted the long silence. "This girl's name is Katie. She's your daughter. Would you like to meet her?" "I don't mind," she said firmly, seeing that Jason was not happy about the situation. "She's going to live in our house now." "Are you crazy?" Jason raised his voice. "Why did you believe her so easily? What makes you think she's my daughter? Because of some picture? That's bullshit. Jason, calm down. Emily pushed the frightened girl forward. Katie, come on in. We need to talk about this together. Emily took Katie and her husband under her arm and led them into the living room, seating them on the couch. She sat down in the chair opposite. A few days ago, I noticed a girl standing by the fence of our cottage, but today she dared to come up to me, explaining who she was. Emily showed me this picture. Her mom is gone now. She's dead. Emily sighed and fell silent. But when she saw that her husband could barely contain himself from contradicting her, she continued. Katie explained everything to me and how mean you were to her mother. And I can see from your reaction that it's all true. So you listen and don't argue. Don't you have any interest in what happened to the woman you're supposed to love? You forgot her, but she didn't forget you. She didn't get an abortion, gave birth to a daughter, and has been watching your life unnoticed all these years. She loved you no matter what. Or maybe she felt that someday everything she knew about your life might come in handy. A few years ago, my mom got sick, Katie said. There was no one to help. The only family left was her brother, who went to America back in the 90s. And then there was no more news of his life, but Mom fought the disease. The money ran out and she had to mortgage the apartment. And about 2 weeks ago, Mom got worse. Realizing she was dying, she decided to tell me everything about you and about leaving her. And about the curse too, giving me the only memory of you, this photo. Jason, that girl may be your only chance to make up for what you've done, Emily continued. Especially after her mother died. The apartment was repossessed and Katie was put in an orphanage. You know what that means, don't you? Think about it. You're out of your mind, Jason yelled, as if out of a daze. Emily thought she didn't recognize her husband at all. He's the spitting image of his mother. So I've choked your brains out. What are you talking to me now, Jason, in my ears like a hypnotist? Look at her eyes, she's a real witch. Who is she? Were you listening all the way through? He was interrupted by Emily's scream. The girl, not wanting to go to the orphanage, ran away and found us. She has been wandering the streets for days, sleeping on a bench in the park, shivering from the cold at night. She is hungry and scared. So I think we should keep her warm and fed. But Ashley has agreed to take a DNA test, and somehow I'm sure it'll show your paternity. I see, and you don't doubt it. She added ironically, thinking that there was probably a lot she didn't know about her husband. Tomorrow morning we'll go to the lab and take the test to clear up any doubts. Now, Ashley, you need to clean yourself up. I'll let you change and then we'll go to the kitchen together. You need to eat. It's dinner time. Jason, we're waiting for you in the kitchen. Dinner's ready. Everything's on the stove. I'm not hungry, Jason snapped, and left the room in extreme irritation, realizing that he'd lost this fight. But nothing, he muttered to himself as he left the living room. We'll see who's who. The daughter had been found, but the DNA test had clearly shown that Ashley was Jason's daughter. When he tried to argue with his wife again, it was as if he'd run into a concrete wall. Emily was adamant that if she ever heard anything against Ashley being in the house again, she would file for divorce. Understand, the girl was even willing to become a servant in our house, if only we would adopt her instead. She said to her husband, trying to appeal to his reason. Emily was just happy, because her dream of having a daughter had suddenly become a reality. She did not hesitate to file the adoption papers and insisted that Jason recognize himself as her father. Ashley turned out to be a good girl. She couldn't believe her happiness that her life was getting better and she had a new mom. Ashley helped Emily around the house and spent all her free time with her. Only Jason didn't share their happiness. The thought that Ashley would be a constant reminder of his meanness in their home until she came of age drove him crazy. Wait a minute, you bastard, he thought. You'll run away from here yourself. Just give it time. You'll see. Since Ashley's arrival at their house, the couple had almost stopped talking. Emily's attempts to defuse the situation and involve Jason in their daughter's upbringing hadn't worked. He withdrew into himself and increasingly resorted to the bottle. Ashley stayed away from her father under the approving glances of her wife, realizing that if she tried to get along with him, she'd see no good. Jason had never been a stickler for alcohol, hardly ever drinking until now. But once, on his way back from work, he stopped by a bar, sat down near the bar, ordered a cup of strong coffee, hoping that the calm atmosphere of the cozy bar would distract him from bad thoughts. The music was soft and pleasant. There weren't many customers, and Jason soon relaxed, completely immersed in his thoughts. He was upset about what he had found out his company had lost the lucrative tender he had been counting on. Suddenly a voice sounded just above his ear. "What, buddy, did your wife leave you or something?" Women are like that, aren't they? I myself got my brains blown out. Don't grieve, brother. Spit on them, that's all. Let's have a little bang with you, and then life will be more fun. Vadik, he shouted to the bartender. For me, as usual, and what's your name? He asked, puzzled, wondering if he knew Jason or not. Jason glanced in his direction and realized that his unexpected companion was already drunk. Tyler was squinting drunkenly. He introduced himself enthusiastically, wondering if he should send the guy right away. Jason decided a change of scenery wouldn't hurt him, though, so he introduced himself. Not half an hour later, he had a glass of cognac in front of him, and his new acquaintance was reaching over with his own glass, sitting on a neighboring chair and winking and proposing the first toast to the meeting. Jason didn't want to get drunk, but the cognac was unexpectedly good, and soon he sensed that his new acquaintance Tyler wasn't so drunk. The bar became more crowded. Musicians came up on the stage and live music began to play. Jason's mood lightened a little for the first time in days. Suddenly he found his cognac glass empty, and Tyler was already reaching for it with a new toast, and then another and another. Jason sat there, not recognizing himself and not understanding how he'd ever gotten himself into this situation. The unaccustomed dose of alcohol was clouding his brain. He could barely make sense of what was happening. Suddenly, a noisy group of people piled into the bar, and judging by how animated Tyler was, they were his good acquaintances. They surrounded the bar, all of them quite tipsy. What happened next, Jason remembered vaguely. He'd gone to a restaurant with this group, then another. In the morning, he found himself in some apartment, lying in the arms of a drunkenly sleeping beauty with makeup smeared on her face. He lowered his feet off the bed and realized they were standing on someone's sweaty back. As he struggled to put his head down, he felt a bout of nausea, bright flashes spinning in his eyes. Beneath his feet, right on the floor beside the bed, lay Tyler, an acquaintance from yesterday. He was wheezing in his sleep, spreading the smell of booze around the room, and didn't even wake up when Jason put his feet on him. Jason looked around and saw several other people sleeping soundly in huddles around the room. Suddenly he went cold, searching his pockets for his cell phone. The expensive watch his wife had given him for their wedding anniversary had mysteriously disappeared from his hand, and Jason frantically searched for the phone to see what time it was. By the light streaming in from the window, it was far from early morning. There was the sound of street noise through the open window, the sound of automobile engines. Somewhere behind the wall, music was playing softly. What time is it? Jason thought feverishly. His head was treacherously dizzy. The room and the drunken people around him were shifting before his eyes, as if they were on the rocks of the sea. His cell phone was in his jacket pocket. Jason turned on the screen and clutched his head. The meeting with the partners scheduled for today was supposed to start 3 hours ago. There was no point in hurrying now. The partners who had stayed late for this meeting were probably on a plane on their way home by now. Jason couldn't believe that he'd caused the disruption of an important meeting that would affect the future of his company. His phone screen was blaring with missed calls and he was being searched. But could he hear the calls through the snoring of his drunken rage after last night's libations? Barely finding his car keys, he shakily made his way to the door and left the house. To his surprise, the car was still there. How could I have driven it yesterday, Jason thought, getting behind the wheel and starting the engine. The next moment it seemed to him that the theater of the absurd was continuing as in a bad dream. The engine of his expensive car, which had been running smoothly before, suddenly malfunctioned as if on cue. Jason sat behind the wheel, not understanding what was happening, trying to start the always perfectly running engine. Finally, the car moved, and he pulled out of the yard and onto the street. Jason decided to drive straight home, informing his secretary that he wouldn't be at work today. He rudely advised her to mind her own business in response to her question about what had happened to him. It was rush hour, and Jason fought sleep furiously, idling among the cars in the endless traffic jams. He didn't get home until lunchtime, leaving the car on the street. Jason entered the gate, and as he approached the house along the tiled walkway, he heard his daughter's voice, as if telling him something, and his wife's answering voice, the which, "It's all her fault," he thought angrily. Before she came, everything had been nice and peaceful, and now there was nothing but trouble. And this is just the beginning. Well, wait a minute, you little bastard. I'll give you a sweet life. You think you snuck into our house like a snake and now you're going to live a sweet life? Don't get your hopes up. But my ex-wife got to me, even though she's dead. As he entered the house, he heard voices coming from the kitchen. Emily appeared in the hallway. "Where have you been?" she asked sternly, wrinkling her nose at the pungent odor of booze. "I've been calling you every hour at work. They searched you. Why didn't you answer? What happened? I thought you were in trouble, but apparently you were just having a good time somewhere," she remarked, looking at her husband in surprise and thinking again how poorly she knew him. Ashley peeked out of the kitchen, but hid immediately when she noticed her father's hard stare in her direction. Jason was filled with black anger when he saw his daughter. It wouldn't fully weathe her eyes. The alcohol only made it worse. "You mean girl, come here right now. You shut up and stay out of this." Jason shoved Emily roughly away, and she fell to the floor, losing her balance. Jason stepped over her and moved into the kitchen, leading the struggling Ashley out into the hallway. The girl squirmed and trembled in fear, waiting for the worst to happen. "Mommy," she screamed, rushing to Emily, who was struggling to get up off the floor, out of Jason's grasp. Ashley rushed over to Emily, helping her up. "Daddy hit you?" "Yes?" the girl cried and hugged Emily. "Mommy." Jason was furious. "What kind of mom is she to you? She's nothing to you. And I'm nothing to you. Don't you dare call me that, you little brat, or I'm going to." Jason stopped talking. Emily got up off the floor. "Ashley, you called me Mom." "I've wanted to hear that from someone for a long time," she said, hugging the girl. "Don't you dare yell at her." Emily looked at her husband in fury. "You'd better go and sleep it off. You look like you're on the rack. Come on, Ashley." Sobering up was taking its toll, and Jason felt as if the air had gone out of him, like an inflatable balloon bobbing up and down. He struggled to the couch in the living room, collapsed on it, and fell into a dead, drunken sleep. He slept the rest of the day and night until morning. Jason woke up at dawn. Everything that had happened seemed like a bad, absurd dream. It seemed as if he had suddenly and unexpectedly fallen into some other reality that was completely different from the normal life he had been used to living before. The girl, he suddenly remembered, is the root of all my troubles and misfortunes. Indeed, until she appeared in our house, everything was fine, quiet, and here are now running eyes looking for her. Apparently it shines just like my mother's, only on a different plane. Take it away, and everything will be as it was before, Jason thought, standing under the cold jets of the shower. Breakfast was waiting on the table. Emily's always been a good wife, Jason thought as he munched on warm pancakes with sour cream and hot black coffee. There was a reason I'd chosen her to be my wife. Then, angry again, Jason choked on his coffee. Now he couldn't eat in peace in his own house. It's all her fault, Emily standing up for her. If she said anything, she'd be against it. This whole thing needs to be dealt with immediately. Let's see who's running away from who. If the little witch goes away, Emily will be back to her old self. No, she won't. Suddenly, Jason had a plan: accuse the girl of stealing, make a scene, call the police, and demand she leave. Otherwise, juvie. Satisfied with himself, Jason quickly packed up and drove to work. In the reception area, Amber was already in her usual seat, saying hello. "Good morning, Jason," she said in the official tone of a disciplined subordinate. However, Jason didn't escape her curious, slightly surprised look. He frowned. Trouble again. "Okay, go get it," he mumbled grudgingly to the secretary. "That's what you're sitting here for." Amber nodded, silently escorting her boss to the door of his office. He's weird, she thought. Missed such an important meeting yesterday, and today he looks like he's been out all night. Amber was a smart girl and a good secretary, so she never said too much less ask stupid questions. What did she call Valentinovich to herself? He had never acted like a bore before. He had never harassed her without using his superior position. And he'd always paid her salary on time. What else does a girl need? Amber sometimes ironized to herself. Although having an affair with a rich boss, isn't that the dream of many girls like her? Even if he was married, what did it matter? There was a moment when she somehow hinted at it, making eyes, put on a shorter skirt than usual, passed him a special gait, swaying hips. But Valentinovich didn't fall for it, Amber decided. The boss was either too busy working, or, except for his wife, he didn't see anyone else around. But the latter is unlikely, she thought then. After all these years together, I'd go crazy just thinking about it. The fact that the boss had a mistress on the side, Amber did not allow. She would have found out about it. She had a good eye, and he didn't look like a man who liked to go out, always working, always in his own thoughts. But there was something wrong with Valentinovich. Amber pondered at work, staring at the computer screen. Had he found a hottie on the side? Suddenly it hit her. Now you're getting it, beautiful. She was going to do it. She was going to do it. And in the end, someone else snuck in instead of you. She thought grudgingly. Valentinovich looked as if he'd had a good night out. Where he'd been, and with whom, the question. But in any case, it was obvious that the boss had had a lot of fun. What an idiot to have missed such a man in my neighborhood, Amber thought. Jason entered his office, walked past his desk, and went straight to the break room. A round mirror hung on the wall near the sink and faucet. He leaned his palms on the edge of the sink and stared at his face reflected in the mirror. Frustration contorted his features, and he wrinkled his nose. The aftereffects of that drunken binge were still lingering. His face looked wrinkled and aged. There were creases around his mouth and bags under his eyes, as if he'd been drinking heavily. Okay, with that look, except for Amber, no one will see me tonight. The meeting's postponed, the partners are gone. Jason suddenly remembered the meetings he'd blown off. This was really bad. Or should I have Amber call them? No, I'd rather do it myself. Jason took another look at his reflection in the mirror. It wasn't any better. He didn't feel like working at all. I shouldn't be drinking like this, especially not in such quantities, and in such strong drinks, he thought, trying to tune into the upcoming conversation. There's a reason I haven't drunk all my life. No more. Alcoholic parents. My father drank endlessly, went out, didn't want to work, disappeared for weeks. Until one day he disappeared completely. 6 months later, he was found in a roadside ditch with his head broken off. That's how my father ended his life. Mother was not lagging behind either. She didn't wait for her husband. Didn't leave the house. She drank every penny she earned cleaning and scrubbing floors in the local diner after she got her paycheck. The only thing Jason remembered from his childhood was being alone and hungry. Emily's not expensive. Eventually, she got to the point of white fever, after which she was hospitalized. He hadn't felt any warm emotions toward Ashley since he'd been a father. All he saw in the girl was a reflection of the friend he'd abandoned years ago and her curses. Those thoughts infuriated him, just as he was furious that his calm and reasonable wife had suddenly taken such a firm and stubborn stand on the unwanted daughter. After paying for lunch, Jason decided to drive to a facility outside of town and then home from there. Unable to trust people completely, he liked to oversee the work himself. His favorite expression was, "If you want it done well, do it yourself." Construction was in full swing. It took about 2 hours to settle business matters and check the progress of the work. As Jason got ready to go home, he was again stuck in traffic at the entrance to the city. The traitorous drowsiness had set in again. He fought sleep as he drove, wondering how he could make his daughter want to leave home. Suddenly, his dream was gone. Jason remembered that the watch his wife Emily had given him the day before was missing from his hand. There he thought, "Hang on now, daughter. There's no watch. And where is it? I don't know. It's a good watch, expensive." But everything the dream was gone. The traffic jam had finally moved. Jason braked sharply, and a car stopped right in front of him. He was already thinking of a plan of action, preparing to play the role of the offended benefactor of the theft. He decided to act immediately. When he pulled up to the house tonight, Jason was too lazy to put the car in the garage and left it outside. He entered the gate. As he walked down the driveway toward the house, he suddenly heard his daughter's happy laughter and his wife Emily's joyful voice, answering her. "Nasty girl," Jason thought to himself. "But that's all right. You won't have long to be happy. You'll leave this house and everything will be as it was before, nice and quiet." The front door to the cottage was unlocked. Quietly entering the house, Jason saw an unpleasant sight from the hallway. Emily was sitting on the couch and Ashley was standing next to her with one foot on her heel. They were laughing merrily, twirling her from side to side. On the girl's slender, graceful foot was a slipper with a small heel, the kind of shoe that young girls like to wear. Not yet mastering the art of walking in real heels, Emily looked pleased and happy as she watched the girl. "What the hell is that?" Jason roared. It was clear that Emily had bought her daughter new shoes, and that spurred Jason's determination to kick Ashley out of his house at all costs. But it wasn't even that pissed him off the most. His daughter's slender ankle and narrow knee resembled his mother's beautiful legs. A witch. She's a witch again. That's it. Hold on, Jason thought. Seeing her husband in the doorway, Emily quickly jumped up. "Alcohol," Jason yelled. "Did you know that girl is a thief?" He pushed Ashley onto the couch. "Take off your shoes." Now Jason ripped the shoes off the girl's feet and tossed them into the corner. "Get out of here." "What are you talking about?" Emily shouted, pulling the crying Ashley against her. "Or did you get drunk again somewhere along the way? Think what you're saying." "I am thinking," the man bellowed back. "These are thieves and scoundrels. You shouldn't give presents, you should call the police." He pointed to the wrist of the hand on which he usually wore the watch given by his wife. "See where my watch is? Yes, your gift for our wedding anniversary. I've looked everywhere for it. It's nowhere to be found. And it seems to me that you little bum, took the watch. There's no one else." Emily was silent. "Take it easy," she said. She realized that the old Jason, with whom she had been so in love and with whom she had lived the happy years of her marriage, was not coming back. She no longer recognized her husband, or simply didn't know him. Suddenly she felt bitter and tears of disappointment glistened in her eyes. "How can you blame Ashley? Couldn't you have lost them yourself during your drunken binge? By the way, you still haven't explained to me where you were and why you didn't show up home like that." Until 24 hours later, Emily said, looking at her husband sternly. "Where was I? I'm going to call the police right now and we're going to find out where I was," Jason yelled furiously right in his daughter's face. You better get out of the house yourself. Jason, that's enough. You already know perfectly well that she didn't do it, Emily said. Ashley clung to her shoulder in fear. She was trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mom, I didn't take that watch, she said through her tears. I didn't see it. I know, daughter. And I don't doubt it, Emily kissed the girl. You don't have to leave our house, for it's not your fault at all. She's not your daughter. Jason was already dialing the police number in a blind rage. Hello, police? I've been robbed, he told the officer on duty, giving the address. A watch my wife gave me as a gift is missing. Yes, an expensive one. It's definitely not at home. Soon the police arrived. Ashley wanted to leave the house several times, but Emily dissuaded her, reasoning that her departure would look like a flight from justice. The girl trembled and clutched silently to Emily's shoulder. After interviewing Jason as the victim, the police asked Ashley to return the watch if she had taken it. The girl did not confess. The police officers then asked permission to search Ashley's room. However, the watch was neither found nor recovered. Having gone on a bender, Jason had absolutely no recollection of the circumstances under which his item might have gone missing. His intoxication had been so strong at the time that he remembered nothing at all. He kept quiet about it, however, certain that Ashley would be picked up on suspicion anyway. When they had finished questioning him, the officers told him that they would have to go to the police station and file a missing persons report. They were taking Ashley with them as a suspect. Emily was going to go with them to the station as well. Jason, she's just a kid. Look at her, Emily tried to appeal to her husband's conscience. She really did, Ashley, being a mere 16 years old, looked like a teenager. Small, very thin, she rarely smiled and looked like a hungry stray kitten. And only the bright blue, huge eyes like her mother's gave her away as not a child, but a very young girl. Nothing. She's no child. She's got a passport. And she smoked in half her face. Let her deal with it, Jason smirked wickedly. He was sure the girl was going to be detained until they found out what was going on, and then it would be over. A police car. As they say, a man's a man and a story's a story. Ashley doomed herself and the cops. They waited patiently in the hallway as Emily suddenly said to them, I want to confess. Let the girl go. I'm the one who took the watch. I had a fight with my husband. I decided to get back at him, so I took it secretly. I sold it in a back alley at the market dressed like a beggar for nothing. I don't remember to whom. I wanted to spite my husband more, because he has changed a lot lately. He became rude, started drinking. We fight about everything, so take me away. This is all my fault, not Ashley. The police officers looked at Jason in surprise and asked if he was willing to write a statement for his own wife. Jason, dumbfounded, remained silent. This was not exactly the turn he had expected. The policeman repeated the question, as if pushing them toward their new job. A walkie-talkie went off muffled in the pocket of one of them. No, of course I won't, Jason replied in confusion. One thing he realized was that the girl had managed to beat him again. With an angry, capitulating wave of his hand, a final spit, and a deliberately loud drowning in protest, he walked up the stairs to his office, went inside, and slammed the door as hard as he could. The police officers left to go about their business, realizing that the conflict was over. It was just an ordinary domestic quarrel, they decided, immediately forgetting about the incident. All the more so when an urgent call came in. A drunken brawl had broken out in a restaurant on a neighboring street, with stabbing and casualties. As the police drove away and Jason retired to his office, Emily hugged Ashley and said, gently pressing her cheek against her crying cheeks, "Don't cry, daughter. I won't let anyone hurt you now. Don't be afraid of anything and wear your shoes. Don't be afraid. And if necessary, we'll leave this place altogether. I'm quite well off without him, without a husband. My father saved up a dowry for me before Jason and I married, and now. After all these years, the money is multiplied. I've managed to invest it well in my time, so we'll be able to live on the interest it's earned. And I have an apartment. This apartment, a gift from my father, and now we rent it to a tenant. And if we want to, you and I can live in it apart from Jason. Let's go to dinner. Everything's ready. Jason closed himself in his office on the second floor, sat down at his desk in a high-backed leather chair, and thought darkly. What was happening to him now, he didn't understand at all. Always fixated on his work and thinking mainly about profit, income, and succeeding in life. He kept catching himself thinking that all of that had now taken a back seat. The well-established business that had been running for many years and was working perfectly seemed to have reacted to his current state by starting to give the first alarm signals. The unexpectedly lost tender had unpleasantly surprised Jason. What could have happened that a competitor who had always lagged behind him would suddenly bypass his company so easily? Trouble, as we know, does not come alone. It was confirmed by that wild, sudden drinking spree that had started out of nowhere during a meeting at the bar and ended with a hangover that still gave Jason a headache. Once again, a blow to his business. Missing such an important meeting when a much-needed tender had been lost. Jason clenched his fists. It all felt like the pent-up revenge of a once jilted girlfriend, as if her curses were now being fulfilled in his life. After all, it was no coincidence that this girl had shown up right now. Jason thought it was as if the girl's mother had risen from the grave like a sinister ghost and was staring at him with a piercing, witchy gaze. Jason shuddered and jumped up in his chair. He had dozed off under the weight of his thoughts and saw the frightening image as if it were real. For the first time in years, he felt like a helpless, lonely, hungry boy, like he had in his long-gone childhood. Jason felt like he was losing control of the situation. He simply didn't recognize himself. A sudden thought pierced through him. Were my affairs as good as I thought they were? In the past year, he had noticed signs of the current problems. Partners and suppliers had expressed dissatisfaction with his business practices on several occasions. Yes, he was overconfident at times. Yes, he put his own interests first, sidelining partners. But this is business, not child's play. He always justified himself the strongest man wins, and the strongest man is usually right. Not girly worries, but real business. His behavior in business matters sometimes angered others. But despite this, he got away with it. However, the tender turned out to be lost in a bad way. Jason realized how often he had risked everything recklessly that had won until the last moment. But not now. The lost tender needed to close the budget gap had gone out of his hands. A lucrative contract with now resentful partners and a disrupted meeting were his last hope to make things right. And that's where he went wrong. Jason could taste the brandy on his tongue as he remembered the binge. At the same instant, he had a strong urge to drink. That's weird. I'm a non-drinker. Never drank because of family genes. The urge to drink grew stronger. Jason could barely contain himself. What's going on? Maybe I'm sick, or am I going crazy? Emily. She always understood him in every situation. It was enough to put his head in her lap and all troubles went away. But right now, Emily was preoccupied with this girl. Jason didn't want to think of Ashley as his daughter for a second. And now she'd also broken them up with her appearance. Damn the day that foul-mouthed tramp suddenly appeared in the hallway. Jason gritted his teeth furiously. Why hadn't he thrown her out right away? It was dark outside the study window. The house was quiet. Emily and Ashley went to their rooms and went to bed. Night had fallen. Jason was about to go to bed in the study, but he realized that the drowsiness that had been plaguing him all day had suddenly disappeared. Now he wanted to approach Emily and apologize for his rude behavior. Jason didn't have the courage, even though he knew he would do it. Even a wise wife would have forgiven him, and everything would have fallen into place. But the girl, she now came between them, taking all of his wife's attention for herself. Jason knew Emily would surely condition herself to accept the homeless girl as her daughter. To what the hell? He had nothing to apologize for. This wife had betrayed him, dragged the little wretch into his house without asking, which meant it wasn't his fault, but hers. Sleep had receded completely, and Jason realized he wasn't going to get any sleep. It was a warm summer night. Jason grabbed his jacket and car keys, put his phone in his pants pocket, and left the house. The city had fallen asleep. Silence took over the deserted streets. Bright stars shone in the clear sky. Jason stood outside the cottage fence, breathing in the warm night air. There was a rustle in the bushes nearby, like a small bird flitting from branch to branch. Then came a melodious sound. Just like when he was a child in his grandmother's village, Jason thought. The car was parked in its place by the gate. Jason got behind the wheel, started the engine, and decided to drive wherever he wanted to go, hoping that the peaceful motion of the car would help him sleep. He drove slowly through the city, not lingering at intersections. The traffic lights were off as night fell. Finally, he stopped, feeling a rush of drowsiness, deciding to fall asleep right there in the car. Not to lose the sleep that had returned, Jason realized he was insanely thirsty. He looked around from the open car window, the windows of a nightclub glowing softly behind the sidewalk. Jason got out, closed the car, and walked through its open doors. The bar was quiet, with only the sound of slow, soft music. There weren't many patrons. In the middle of the room, a couple stood on the dance floor, swaying sleepily, arms around each other. Jason sat down on a high stool behind the bar and asked the bartender for a glass of cold water and a non-alcoholic cocktail with citrus juice and ice. Slowly sipping the cool drink, Jason relaxed and finally felt calm and confident. What was the big deal anyway? Scary at this point. The tender has been lost. There was an option with partners willing to invest in his project. A meeting broke down. So what? He, as in the old days, managed to convince a partner offended by the disruption. And now there's a new date, important meetings. You and your wife have a fight. That's a problem. They're just as likely to fight as they are to make up. Jason always knew that Emily adored him from the beginning of their relationship, and that meant one thing. A woman who loved him would forgive him. Jason was absolutely certain of that. Did he love his wife? Jason, in all the years of marriage, had never asked himself that question. As a commercial, business-minded man, he thought in very different terms. How much of anything is good for me? How much is not? His marriage to Emily he certainly considered favorable and successful for himself. After all, it was from this event that the story of his success in life began. And love. You can't boil porridge with it, and you can't put it on bread, Jason joked when the subject came up. Friends of friends, former buddies of his youth from the working-class suburbs of Los Angeles. Many of them married for love, had children like themselves, with the same factory and beer hall around the corner. Did love give them much happiness in life? Jason categorically did not understand the expression heaven is for the sweetheart and considered this phrase to be the most soothing excuse for desperate losers. Heaven is when you have a nice, comfortable house and a solid bank account, he thought. And love is like that, in a hovel. Even the biggest and strongest has a good chance of coming to naught, Jason was sure. His personal happiness had always been measured in material terms: money, income, success in life. And the fact that a man could have both love in his life and wealth, Jason didn't allow for that. He just didn't believe in it and considered it a beautiful fairy tale for silly young girls. As Jason downed his cocktail, he calmed down and pulled himself together. As before, he was soberly assessing the situation and thinking in cold blood. The only thing left was the girl, he thought. All right, she can wait. I'll think of a way to get rid of her later. It would be the last thing I'd ever do to fight with my wife over this abomination. Don't forget that Emily wasn't poor either. When Jason's business had gotten into money trouble, his wife's savings had helped him out. Jason didn't use it often, only as a last resort. All the more so because Emily herself believed that these funds should be a reliable safety cushion for her personally. For the most unforeseen event in life, sometimes taking unnecessary risks in business. Jason always remembered his wife's savings, expecting to use them in a difficult situation. And of course, a fight with his wife would not be good for him right now. He needed to make peace with Emily and pretend to accept Ashley's presence in the house. There you are, all of you, Jason thought, clenching his fist. He got off the chair and was about to go home when he felt a firm tap on his shoulder and heard a drunken voice in his ear. "Brother, is that you?" And I come in, I look, "You're not you, I can't understand. If it's not you, why does this dude look so much like you? Or did I have too much to drink, grinning so drunk?" Jason was facing the same unexpected drinking buddy, Tyler, that had gotten him into this whole mess with the law and the deal breaker. How did he even get here, Jason thought. I guess he just dropped in unnoticed. I was so busy with my own thoughts that I missed it. I can't believe that face. So, I'm thinking. Tyler began. Wait, my throat's dry. He sipped a good half of the glass he was holding. It smelled like a cloud of strong alcohol. So I'm thinking, he continued, and if it's you and not some other dude, then why? Tyler gave a drunken laugh. Jason got the impression that his buddy had already taken a lot on his chest somewhere before and was going to start drunkenly vomiting, right now. And here he pulled away from him just in case. And if it's you, then why are you drinking some compote here like a woman on the gossip circuit? Tyler continued to smirk. Satisfied with himself, he laughed wildly again, stuttering. Jason took advantage of the moment to make a sneaky exit and headed for the door. Tyler, however, reacted quickly to his attempt to leave, grabbing Jason's sleeve tightly. "You're not a man, are you?" he said dismissively. "I'm just kidding. No offense, bro. Knowing that you're a man, he wouldn't lie to me. How was it last time? Or don't you remember anything? It was pretty heavy. You remember the cat from last time?" Tyler winked and sipped noisily from his glass. Jason was stunned. No Lita. And had there been something between them or not? And that he had absolutely no recollection of. Except for the drunk lady in bed next to him, with makeup smeared on her face and her hair disheveled like an old mop. And whether this same Lita or someone else was there. The memories made Jason nauseous, but he couldn't remember the details. He thought apprehensively, trying to free himself from Tyler's grip, and to get away. But Tyler was determined not to give up so easily, gripping his sleeve tightly. "Brother, what's your name?" Jason sure remembered brother, he said. "Oh, really? It's kid time. Stay out till morning. My wife kicked me out of the house. Can you imagine? Let's have a drink to that. Hey, bartender. My best friend. A small shot of cognac." Tyler, a big, burly man, almost 6 feet tall, was already dragging Jason back to the bar. Jason suddenly found himself sitting at the bar again, a glass in his hand. Well, except for a drop. Jason thought, taking a sip from the glass. Tyler was already reaching for him with a new toast and a new drink. Suddenly there was a murmur of voices at the entrance to the bar, and Jason thought he was having déjà vu all over again. "What people?" Tyler yelled. "Speak of the devil. Here come the girls. We've been waiting for you girls." Tyler winked, holding a filled glass in his hand, and wrapped his other arm around one of the new arrivals' lush thighs. "I'd like to meet you, bro. This is Catherine, my girlfriend. Not just mine, though. A lot of other people's." "What's the difference? We're going out now." Jason was relieved to realize that the notorious Lita hadn't come with the group. The alcohol was starting to fog his mind, and he didn't want to leave. Well, I can always leave, he thought, taking another sip of cognac. Catherine was already seated next to him, shooting sly eyes at Jason and leaning languidly against the counter with her lush, open-chested breasts. Jason ordered her a cocktail and took a closer look at his unexpected neighbor. Catherine's face was already showing signs of a promiscuous life, and from her knowing glances she wasn't exactly a looker. "Don't touch that." Jason was already squinting and had completely forgotten that he'd just left. Catherine glanced at his expensive suit and moved closer to Jason, inadvertently catching him with her lush bust that was fading from her cleavage. The fun was picking up. Jason was getting more and more intoxicated and couldn't stop. He felt good now, and even the slightly wrinkled look of Catherine pressed against him was not repulsive. It wasn't long before the company had had enough of the fun and decided to move on to somewhere else. When Tyler heard that Jason had arrived by car, he announced in an unapologetic tone that everyone was going to Jason's house right away, taking Jason, who was barely standing on his feet, along with him. The drunken group, led by Tyler, poured out into the street and made their way to Jason's car, taking the car keys from him. Tyler struggled to squeeze into the driver's seat. The rest of the group squeezed Jason into the back seat and barely fit in the car. Jason realized he was between two girls, one of whom was again Catherine. "Where do you live?" Tyler asked, starting the car and looking at Jason's drunken face. "Do you remember your address?" Jason woke up and strained his memory. His head was buzzing, but he remembered the address. The car shifted, driving the noisy group away. Jason felt sick and fell asleep. One by one, they began to fall asleep. Jason, who had spoken up during their drinking, woke up. He sat up on the couch and looked around in amazement until he was inexpressibly surprised to find himself in his own home. Jason had expected to see anything but his living room. Emily clutched her head in horror. She'd seen his drunken party, and the girls too, who were not of the most exemplary behavior. Barely able to get up, Jason went to the bathroom. He threw up. He brushed his teeth and shaved. With shaking hands, he stood under the cold shower for a few minutes, trying to collect his thoughts. Jason felt small again, trembling with fear of the unknown, a boy losing control of what was happening. He changed into a terry robe and went into the kitchen to make himself a strong, unsweetened cup of coffee. The drinking buddies were sound asleep in a heap all around the living room. His wife and daughter were nowhere to be seen. After the silence had fallen, they must have finally been able to sleep soundly. Jason went up to his office, sat down at his desk and leaned back in his chair, resting his outstretched legs on it. Settling down, he adjusted himself for the workday, trying to start taking control of his life again, despite the intrusive rattling in his head. There was a wild urge to hangover, but Jason held on, realizing he'd overdone it again. This time it was complicated by the fact that his wife had seen the full extent of his fall, including the cheerful girls. How would he explain himself to her? Jason pondered and couldn't find an answer. These thoughts were interrupted by the quiet sound of the door opening. Jason lifted his head and shuddered in surprise. It seemed to him that he was more sober than his eyes had realized, a horrible hallucination. A thin, barefoot woman's foot slowly slipped through the opening. Jason went cold with horror. He thought it looked exactly like Ashley's dead mother's foot. He clutched his neck and stared at the door, as if he expected to see his former friend rising from the grave. But there was a soft laugh, and Catherine's recent drinking companion slipped through the doorway into the study. Jason was stunned at the sight of her, her skin glistening with water droplets. It looked like she'd just taken a shower. She was dressed in a single towel wrapped around her body, barely holding on to her lush bust. The pretty girl, swaying her hips as she walked slowly over to the table. "Good morning, sweetie," she said, sitting down on the edge of the table and leaning toward her coworker, giving off the fumes of alcohol. "I took a little swim here. You don't mind, I hope? I wake up and see you're gone. I went to look for you, and then I looked in the bathroom. You're standing under the shower, I wanted to join you, but then I decided to surprise you." She bent down even lower, and the towel slid open and slid down, unable to withstand the pressure of her lush bust. Before Jason knew it, Catherine was sitting on his lap, her wet arm around his neck. Jason stared in horror and wonder. Well, something like that is what I expected to see. His wife stood in the doorway of the study. I wanted to talk, but now I see there's nothing to talk about. That's it. Ashley and I are leaving and staying with my parents for now, and then my apartment will be available. I'll call the realtor today so we can look for a new place next month," Emily said softly and left. Jason remained silent, shocked by the situation, realizing that all excuses to his wife would be useless. Catherine, pleased with the turn of events, smiled silently, sitting on his lap and wrapping her arm around his neck, her eyes fixed on the wealthy man. This was roughly what she'd hoped for when she'd started the shower and towel story. The plan had worked. The wife was leaving for good. Finally, Jason rose abruptly from his chair, dropping the girl from his lap. "Get out of here. Go. Tell my wife that nothing happened between us and you were just kidding." "Well, quick. Who am I telling?" He dragged the girl toward the door. Downstairs, the front door slammed. Jason looked out into the yard. Emily, along with Ashley, walked outside, each carrying a small suitcase. Emily pulled her car out of the garage, got behind the wheel, drove out of the yard, and they drove off, loading the things into the trunk. Jason stood silently at the window, watching. "There, you see, you don't have to go anywhere else." Catherine, silently approaching the window, watched with satisfaction, pressed herself against her colleague and hugged him from behind, wrapping her arms around his stomach. Her bright red manicured hand slowly slid across the floor of his terracloth bathrobe. Suddenly, Jason felt as if he'd deflated. He didn't care what was going on. They asked for it, he thought to both his wife and Catherine at the same time. A moment later, he and Catherine were in his and Emily's marital bedroom. Morning came. After kicking the guests out, Jason left for work. For a month and a half now, Emily and Ashley had been living separately. She and Jason hadn't seen each other since the fight. Jason thought about calling his wife, but when he realized that his desire to kick the girl out of the house had come true, he calmed down and changed his mind. If there was anything he cared about now, it was his own business. Jason's business was getting worse. The meeting with the partners he'd hoped for had fallen short of his expectations. The partners offered new, less favorable terms of cooperation. This meant that Jason's business was in a serious financial hole. Jason was nervous, trying to find a way out, but he decided not to ask Emily for help just yet. His new friends, led by Tyler, were now hanging out at his house. Catherine, satisfied that she'd kicked Jason's wife out of the house on any plausible pretext, was more and more likely to stay at his place for a few days. As Jason's girlfriend, she constantly asked him for money for one thing or another. When he tried to explain that he didn't have any extra money at the moment, and that his business was in trouble. Without saying a word, Catherine pulled Jason into bed, often getting her way. Jason had been planning to kick Catherine out of his life for a long time. But the obsessive and cunning girlfriend, as if reading his thoughts, always turned the situation so that her expulsion was postponed time after time. There were various reasons for this. The plumbing in the house suddenly broke down, and Catherine was faithfully on duty waiting for the locksmiths. While Jason was at work, the electricity was strangely short-circuited. And one day the girlfriend even called an ambulance to the house with suspected acute poisoning. The ambulance had pumped her stomach and advised bed rest for the next couple of days. Jason sighed. He had enough to worry about. Without her clever scheming, Jason was finding new problems to deal with. He was drinking regularly now, aided by Catherine's constant presence in his house. She was a big fan of the collar. The frequent drinking had taken its toll on Jason's appearance. Sometimes in the mornings, barely awake after a heady sleep, he'd show up at work looking like a real slacker, not having time to clean himself up after another binge. One day, drunk, Jason stopped by his wife's apartment. deciding to ask her for help in case of an emergency. Ashley opened the door, hugging Jason from the doorway with her piercing blue gaze. At the sight of her daughter, Jason's rage returned. He pushed the girl away and stormed out the door. Emily came out to the noise. When she saw her husband on the doorstep, she grimaced with annoyance. "Why do you want to be here?" she asked and waved her hand at Ashley, asking her to leave the scandal in her room. Ashley reluctantly left, fearing that her father would hit Emily. "You see, it's all because of her, that little tramp," he said angrily, adjusting the collar of his freshly crumpled shirt. "She's the one who brought that little wretch into the house, and that's what started all this mess. All because of her and her witch mother." "Yeah, I remember, Jason. You've never been like that," Emily said hotly. "It's not about the girl. You're the cause of your own misery. Don't you see? Anyone else would be glad that you had a daughter, that you had a chance to make up for your mistakes by recognizing her and being a real father to her. But instead, you're shifting all the responsibility onto a child who is not to blame for being born. From an irresponsible man like you. Look what you've become." Emily pointed to the mirror hanging on the wall. "You're turning into a crude, filthy animal, blaming it on another human being. I understand that you're going through a rough time, but you're the cause of it, not Ashley. You're radiating so much hate and fear, and it's attracting more problems." Emily was silent, staring at her husband. "I'm thirsty," Jason said suddenly. He realized there would be no conversation. Sighing, Emily fetched a glass of water. She drank it greedily and demanded more. He was thirsty after last night's raucous party and Catherine working beside him. Emily brought more water and hurried her husband out. Jason hurried home. Catherine called to let him know that she was waiting for him at the table. Suddenly, he had a craving for a drink now. Not waiting at home, Jason stopped at the nearest bar. He'd had a good drink with two of the other regulars. Barely on his feet, he got behind the wheel and hit the road, driving on autopilot. He drove most of the way, already almost entering the city. Jason suddenly blacked out behind the wheel. The car lost control and flipped into a roadside ditch. When he woke up from the impact and realized what had happened, Jason struggled to get out of the car and looked around. The single-story houses of the suburbs were not far away. The domes of the church peeked out from the treetops, swaying from side to side. Jason shuddered at the thought that he could have been killed in the accident. The thought sobered him a little. Lucky, he grinned mentally and headed down the highway toward town. It wasn't as close as he thought it would be. When the fence of the church loomed close, Jason realized that his strength had deserted him. He sat down on the ground beneath a roadside bush and fell into a deep sleep. How long Jason slept, he did not know. By the time he reached the suburbs on foot, it was dark, the streets were empty, and Jason lay on the ground, sound asleep, unnoticed by anyone. Suddenly, his sleep was interrupted. Someone was rubbing his shoulder insistently. Jason opened his eyes and saw a face with a long gray beard leaning over him in the twilight. "Alive. Praise the Virgin Mary." Jason heard. "I saw a man lying there not breathing. I touched your shoulder. I see he's awake. Wake up, good man. You shouldn't be lying here." A passerby helped Jason to his feet. "Where are you from? Are you here? Let's go to my place for the night, and tomorrow we'll pull your car out," the man said when Jason explained what had happened to him. The man who had awakened him was a priest from the local church. When he finished his business, he locked the church and found Jason sleeping at the gate on his way home. When he brought him home, Father John, as the priest was called, set a simple meal on the table, inviting Jason to eat with him. A simple jacket potato with sunflower oil and fresh cucumber tasted better than any of the dishes in an expensive restaurant. Like his grandmother's village, he thought, setting the kettle and glasses on the table. And Father John asked, "Well, Do you drink? Would you tell me what kind of trouble you're trying to get away from? It might make you feel better." Jason hesitated. He wasn't in the habit of talking about his affairs without trusting people. This priest, however, could hardly hurt him. So Jason, waving off that habit, began to talk. Father John listened in silence, not interrupting, and occasionally asking questions. Then he said, "I understand what has happened to you. If you need advice, now you listen." It was Jason's turn to listen. Surprisingly, he suddenly realized that his wife Emily had told him the same thing more than once. Father Ben was a man of wisdom and judgment. His smooth, sedate speech and old-fashioned manners commanded respect. Jason liked the fact that Father Ben did not scold him, but gently admonished him. There was no judgment in his voice. "There's a reason I was in that accident. I might not have lived to see this moment. I guess it was a sign, like I'm not living right," Jason thought suddenly. He rubbed the bump on his forehead, which must have popped up from the impact with the glass during the accident. It was late at night when Father Ben began to make Jason's bed. The priest had a service at the temple in the morning. As he lay on the rickety cot under the meager blanket, Jason felt as if he were back in his childhood. Night in an old farmhouse. The sounds of grasshoppers coming from the open window outside reminded him of his time at his grandmother's house in the country. Through his light slumber, Jason kept thinking about what Father Ben had said to him, about the events of his present life, about his wife and daughter, about the accident. He didn't fall soundly asleep until morning. Jason woke up close to noon. There were hot potatoes on the table, bread on the table, and a glass jar of milk. Father Ben had long since returned. "After breakfast I'll make tea. Here's the neighbor just in for lunch. He works on the tractor himself. Can he help you get your car out of the ditch?" "Let's go and ask him," Father Ben said. Jason suddenly remembered that he hadn't taken out his cell phone since the accident. He found it in place in his jacket pocket. However, the phone never turned on. To Jason's surprise, the car was not damaged at all and started immediately. "Apparently I fell asleep at the wheel. I slowed down and the car lost control and rolled into a ditch." "Lucky," Jason said thoughtfully, realizing that it could have ended very differently. "Remember what I told you. God gives everyone a chance." "Well, I'll keep coming back to visit," Father Ben said. Jason bade him a warm farewell and left. As he pondered on the road, he realized that everything that had happened to him lately had not been accidental. That accident, the impact of his head against the windshield, had shaken Jason from the inside out. He knew now that he needed to talk to his wife and Ashley. He also realized that he wouldn't be the same. Standing at a stoplight, Jason pulled out his phone again. To his surprise, and as if in response to his thoughts, the phone suddenly turned on, ignoring the numerous missed call alerts. Unable to wait for it for the feast, Jason dialed his wife's number and made an appointment for the evening. When he arrived at work, Jason received some unpleasant news. His partner in the project was suing him for failure to fulfill his obligations. The only thing that could stop this was an immediate indemnification of the partner's company. However, Jason didn't have the funds for that right now. As he dealt with work issues throughout the day, he thought tirelessly about how to resolve the matter, but found no solution. New debts would only make things worse, especially since the partner was accusing Jason's company of fraud, which meant that no one would simply lend him any more money. Several times during the day, the unbearable urge to get drunk came on. Each time, however, he saw Father Ben in his mind's eye, as if he were hearing his words again. Jason shrugged off the thoughts. On that evening, he rang the doorbell of his wife's apartment. Ashley opened the door when she saw her father at the door. She looked at him with fear in her piercing blue eyes. Emily came out into the hallway. Ashley wanted to leave right away, but Jason, calling her by name for the first time, asked his daughter to stay. Emily and Ashley looked at him, not expecting anything good. The conversation had been long and difficult for Jason, but his wife and daughter were getting brighter and brighter as they listened to him. Ashley even smiled at her father for the first time. It was clear now that she had a daddy who recognized her as his daughter. Emily couldn't believe her happiness, but she wanted to go home tonight. Jason, however, asked her to postpone her return. He needed to get the house in order for their arrival. On the way home, he ordered on the phone with the cleaning company for tomorrow a complete cleaning of the house, which during the absence of his wife had turned into a garbage dump. Catherine could hardly be forced to at least wash the glasses for the guests. Entering the house, he found the remnants of the feast in the living room. Their friend sleeping there under the television, he rasped, explaining that she was immediately leaving not only his house, but his life as well. Without listening to her feignedly pathetic excuses, Jason led a leaning Catherine outside the wicket. Then he resolutely poured the rest of the alcohol down the sink and blocked all of the drinking buddies' numbers, including Tyler's and Amber's ex-girlfriend. A day later, Emily and Ashley were already moving into their home together, fully cleaned and spruced up. It was fall. Things had settled down in the family. Ashley went to school. Harmony between the couple gradually returned. But things were getting worse in Jason's business. The court date was approaching, and the means to settle the conflict had not been found. Emily's savings were not up to the task. Much more was needed. Knowing her husband's fiery temper, Emily tried her best to assure him that there would be a way out of the situation and supported him in every way possible. Jason periodically visited Ben's father. Each time he received support from the priest, and even introduced his wife and daughter to him. Father Ben always told Jason, "Remember that according to faith, everyone will be rewarded, and so will you. Believe in the Lord, in yourself, in your strength, in the love of your family, in life." And Jason believed no matter what. And one morning, Emily pulled a letter out of the mailbox. When she read the letter, her face bloomed with happiness. Ashley had come home from school. Emily let her read the letter as well, and together they started calling Jason, who had left for work, to tell him the happy news. The letter had come from a law firm that had tracked down Ashley as the heiress to a large fortune. The girl was surprised to learn that her uncle, her mother's brother, who had left for America in the 90s and never gave any more news about himself, was very successful. He accumulated a solid capital, acquired real estate, but never married and had no heirs. Making inquiries, his uncle found out that his sister had a daughter, but did not marry either. Thinking that what he had accumulated would eventually have to be left to someone, the uncle made a will in favor of his sister and his niece. And just in time. It was as if he had a premonition that a short time later he would die in a major car accident. Ashley didn't hesitate to help her father. Consequently, the court agreed to give Jason a reprieve until the daughter's inheritance rights kicked in. Jason's business was saved. Jason and his daughter Ashley and wife Emily often visit Ashley's birth mom's grave. They ordered a new monument and fence for her, making sure it's clean and bringing flowers to the grave each time. Jason thanks her every time for bringing such a wonderful daughter into their lives, his daughter Ashley.